Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Good morning. My name is Fifi Peters. I am your MC for today. I must say it has been quite interesting hearing quite a few gentlemen complimenting each other today on how good they look in a shirt and a jacket. It's got me thinking all kind of things as to what you normally look like when you're not attending a conference in Melrose Arch. But nonetheless, you do look good, many of you in the room, as do the ladies. Welcome to your conference, essentially as national dealers here in South Africa. As I said, I'm your MC, but really I'm just a passenger here on a 3-hour journey with you that will be navigating the latest trends and looking at the insights and the opportunities as well as the challenges that is facing your market, the car market here in South Africa over the next 12 months. A couple of the thought-provoking sessions that you'll be hearing about from experts who'll be driving us through all of those, just looking at what the economy is doing and what the current uncertainties are saying, trying to look at how to perform better, how your respective dealers can perform better, and activate active employee engagement in order to do so, and also looking at what is happening online and what you need to take a note of in terms of that. But really, it's my first time here. Many of you have been attending this conference for a number of years, and you do know that it really is all about you and what you have to say. Your opinion matters. It's an interactive session, I have been told, and I'm looking forward to interacting with you and hearing everything that you guys do have to say about your market. So how we are going to interact today is via Menti. One of the welcomed inventions from conferencing in the COVID-19 pandemic. We're all familiar with it in the room, right? Most of us are familiar with it. There you go, it's the QR code. Perhaps I should get out the way if you can just scan it right there, or you can just access it on your browser, www.menti.com. The code is right there for you. Okay, I'll just allow you to do your thing. Okay. We good? We're good? Most of us are good? Okay, perfect. So a lot of the questions that we will be taking and polls that will be running throughout the day will be coming on that platform. So perhaps we give it a bit of a test drive to make sure that when we do finally depart, everything is all good. How many coffees? Okay, y'all are okay. 1, 2, all right. 3 or more, all right. Yeah, I sit on this second camp, 2 cups. Oh, actually 3 with the cappuccino that I had when I got here. All right. Definitely not representing the majority in this room. The guys that have one are certainly the healthier ones amongst us, counting their caffeine intakes. And yeah, how are you attending this event? You're at the venue, very nice venue, I must say. All right, we've got quite a significant audience who's also using their PC or online. So like a 70-30 split. Very nice. So good morning to you as well, who are joining us online. So fantastic. We have established that it's working. And as I said, that's how we're going to be engaging with one another throughout the session. And certainly that's how we're going to be inviting the online audience to also have their say. With that said, let's get going. So our first speaker, no stranger to most people in the room, but I will introduce him anyway, Mark Thomas, the national chairperson for the National Automobile Dealers Association in South Africa. And as you know, he is a CA by training, has been involved in the motor industry, or some of you didn't know he's a CA, well, he's a CA by training, and has been involved in the motor industry for over 25 years. Various positions, from being DP to heading a dealership group. So could I kindly ask that you help me welcome Mark with a warm applause.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Fifi. Really nice to meet you in the flesh. You know, coming out of the COVID world and doing a lot of radio interviews and Zoom calls and all these kinds of things. We get to see each other across the computer, but never in the flesh. And it's great to see you and Safisa and a couple others today. And it's great we can have this interaction. So appreciate you all being here. We've got a great day ahead of us. So a very warm welcome to everybody here. What a venue. Very nice venue, nice and cozy, lots of people. And we've got a great day lined up. So I just want to formally welcome everybody. There's a lot of dealers in the room. Scarily, there's a lot of bankers that are rocked up here today. That's always a worry when the bankers are all here. We've got floor plans to pay and a few other things, so that's a bit scary. So yeah, that's it for the welcome, and let's kick off. So where are we? South Africa Inc. I think South Africa Inc.'s a bit like driving without a seatbelt on the M1. At the moment, it kind of is what it feels like at the moment. We're all a little bit scared and excited and that, and I think we've got a bit of a challenge ahead of us. And I think we all kind of realize the gravity of the situation. There's a lot going on. We're dealing with a lot. I don't like listing them, but I'm going to list a few things. We've got the grey listing that we're worried about. Eskom, we're worried about. The economy that we're worried about. The EFF doing a bit of a market share gain exercise on Monday. That's a bit worrying. And just our general South Africanisms that we deal with on a daily basis. I'm sure chatting to everybody here and in the general mood in the corridors is that we always say we're a resilient bunch, and I think we really, really are. We are. We take these things head on. We take them on our stride. We take them on our shoulders. So let's continue that South African spirit, because that's the only thing that I think is going to get us through these tough times ahead. Safisa, nice to have you here. Safisa Sugana, he's going to be our economic speaker a bit later. We've had a few chats on the radio, and I'm really looking forward to your insights just now and how we can adapt and change, which is really exciting. So many questions, as I was saying. Where's the market going to be this year? You know, we finished last year on 529,000 units. I thought that was outstanding, considering where we've come back. We were at pre-pandemic levels. And the jury's out, and we're going to hear from you where you think the market's going to be. We've got a nice poll later. And where is it going to be? And where's the market going? You know, electric cars. Ooh, how are we going to charge the cars? You know? So, and going overseas recently, you're just seeing how many of these electric cars are going on the road, which is exciting. And what's going to do to our businesses? What's it going to do to our workshops one day? And when's this going to happen in South Africa? The jury's out. Will it happen next year? Will it happen in 5 years? Will it never happen? And we'll carry on driving our diesel clunkers around. You know, we don't know. And the industries at a precipice, certainly if you go to Europe and you see what's going on in China and how many of these other train drive cars that are coming, you know, we might not have anything to sell in 5 years' time except electric cars. Who knows? But it's an exciting industry to be in. We certainly are becoming more an IT type business with computers on wheels, rather than a traditional car business where you've got to jumpstart your car with an electric with a battery. And certainly the digital element of what's happening in our business is also scary. So here's the good news. This is the good news of what I wanted to talk about today. And the good news is that bad news is not going to get us through this year. Bad sentiment is not going to get us through the next year either. Okay? If you're going to sit and be woe is me and be negative about the country and negative about Eskom, and it's just another day in the life here, guys. Certainly, the market leaders of last year, 2022, there were some great stories. The market share leader stayed the market share leader. Some of the totem pole people, the new market leaders, are gaining. And there were some gainers in the market share as well. And all those OEMs aren't sitting in their boardrooms thinking of retrenching. They aren't sitting in their boardrooms telling their bosses they're going to have negative growth. They all want to hit a home run. They all want to sell more cars and, you know, smash this year. And if you're lucky enough, you've got a couple of those brands in your stable, hopefully to help you through this year. And if you don't, well, then I think today is going to be a good day, because hopefully we can learn when you've got a bit of a struggling brand or a challenging brand or a brand going through a bit of a flux, like, you know, and it happens across. You can't all have every single brand at every single time cooking. You're going to have some tough times in your brand, and you stick it out. But that's a part of challenging a business. I think a business is far more challenging when you're going through tough times. When you're cooking, it's a lot easier. But it doesn't set you up for the tough times. So certainly we've got some interesting things happening there. Lessons from the past. I don't know if you've seen what's happened in the US this last week. I think 3 major banks have filed for liquidation, which is not good news. And it's certainly reminding me, and the bankers in the room will echo this, reminding me of liquidity challenges that we had back in the 2008 financial crisis. All I can say, I'm not worried about that, but let's remember those lessons. Let's remember how we had to trade and what we had to do in our businesses to get through those very tricky times. Up until now, we haven't had liquidity problems in the world from a car dealership point of view. The banks are happy to write finance. Yeah, sure, some fraud customers are failing their affordability, but certainly the banks have had checkbooks. But I think it could be quite tricky when suddenly the world's liquidity markets start drying up. And we can maybe chat to some of the bankers in the room about that. We're having a coffee over the break. But that could be quite an interesting nuance to what's happening in our future. So let's try to remember these lessons, because that's what's going to get us through this time. I think certainly the 2008 financial crisis, coming out of COVID, how we traded, maybe our businesses are a bit fat, and we've got to sit and look at a few things with some of these headwinds coming our way. Continuing in our industry, I would like to say transformation is continuing to be a challenge in our business, but there are some fantastic stories and some market leaders there. There's some great stories and groups that prioritize transformation, and we have to continue to invest in our people, be diverse, and tap into skills, proper skills base in people. And David Lowry from MSXI is going to speak to us a bit later about people and the prioritizing of people, which I think we sometimes forget about, the investment on the people side instead of investment in the next, just getting to target this month. So looking forward to that. Certainly, if you're looking at cues on transformation and how the EFF is trying to make some market share next week, let's not look at transformation cues from the DA. So we rather look at good businesses that are prioritizing transformation. So enough of that. NADA certainly continues to be the dealer voice and to help the dealer network as much as they can and industry. Certainly, I've gone through a few chair people of late, of vice chairs, and we're always looking for help. So if anybody would like to put their hand up and do some industry work, we would really appreciate it. And we are looking for volunteers. Okay. And who else do we have today? We've got Arthur Goldstuck coming to speak to us once David's spoken. Looking forward to that from Worldwide Works and his insights on digital, etc. And we've got a great panel, guys. We've got brilliant dealers, and we're represented everywhere, except the truckers. I don't think we've got any truckers in the panel, but we've got volume cars, we've got market share leaders, we've got premium cars, and we've got great dealer principals that can sit and give us insights across the world. Germany, Chinese brands, Japanese brands, etc. So, and some great insights, and none of them are shy to put their opinion out there. So during the day, please put your questions out, get some questions into the system. I think there's going to be a facility for that, or think of a question and a roving mic might come your way, and we can grill the panel after our break later. So I wish you a very positive 2023. Let's stay positive, and let's keep doing what South Africans do. So thank you very much.
Stay on stage for just a short while, because I'm told that a lot of you have already answered the first question that Mark actually posed in your presentation, right?
Oh, good.
So it was about what the car market is expected to
wonderful.
do this year, right?
So let's keep that trend going.
Yes. So let's see what the major responses are.
Okay, so I posed the question, last year's total industry vehicle sales ended on just under 529,000 units. Where do you think we will end up for 2023? First answer, I'm worried, less than 529,000. I'm cautious, similar to last year, 529 again. I'm practical, minor growth up on 2022. I'm bullish, big growth above 550,000 units. So that's quite nice. I'm seeing the practical bit of growth leading towards I'm bullish or cautious. So the minority going less. So very interesting insights there. Certainly I'm seeing a bit of growth this year because there's enough stock certainly to sell.
Okay. What's a bit and minor? How do we quantify minor? As in
minor growth.
Yeah.
As in 5%.
5%. Okay, it's 5% minor? Yeah. Okay. Growth is growth. Yeah. But thanks so much, Mark. Thanks so much for that.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Please, can we just give him an acknowledgement? All right, so Mark did most of my job, just in introducing a lot of the speakers that we're going to be hearing from, but perhaps just a bit of color on the next individual who will be taking us into the next gear for today's session, and that is Sifiso Skenjana. And maybe how many of you have had the opportunity of speaking with him when he was a radio host other than Mark? Okay, just Mark. You were the lucky one. Yeah, you were the, where? Oh, stunning. Oh, stunning, sir. What's your name? Manas. Oh, okay. No, lovely to meet you. Manasseh and Mark, the lucky ones to have spoken to Sifiso when he was a host of radio platforms, but right now he's a commentator still and also speaks on other platforms, broadcast platforms like television. He's a columnist and he also writes for other business and economic publications in the country. He's a founder and a managing director of ESG Analytics, a sustainability research and advisory business. And he's just going to be speaking to more on the economy and a whole lot more, I think. But Sifiso, the stage is yours.
Good morning. As I usually do when I introduce myself, I say igama lam ndinguSifiso Skenjana, usibalukhulu, usochenga usidweka amadonelo mabonela empunzini ugaduza, sathi gadu, gadu, gadu. We do that because I stand as one, but I come as 10,000. And as dealers, I think it's the same. You come as one, you stand as millions of mobility enablers in our economy. And so I think it is an important one to continue, I think, to recognize and contextualize our individual contribution and also, I think, just the masses that support the work that we represent here today. So today I'm saying rethinking growth in a complex and uncertain country, and I think growth there is the big conversation, is that this is the thing we've got to be rethinking. And certainly I think it's got to be the point of emphasis as well. So I often say, whenever you want to make sense of relatively complex issues, I've started looking at through this idea of drum beats. And so in the context of this industry as well, I always say there is a drum beat, it is loud, and you can't afford to miss a beat. Now you've got to ask yourself, what are the drum beats that are impacting our industry? What are those drum beats? Which ones are the ones that are so loud that we can't ignore? And what are the ones that we can't afford to miss? Because, of course, then it'll translate into either terrible, I guess, less fortunate outcomes, or really, I think, positive outcomes in the context of this industry. So, one, I think there are a number of pieces that I think are going to then be the the points of conversation around this conversation when we give it a macroeconomic lens as well, is around saying, how do we think about an industry in transition? Two, how do we think about a sluggish policy context that is, I guess, impacting us in one way or another? And then lastly, I think to the point Mark was saying, that is also coming later from David, what does it mean for us to leave no human behind? And so really, I think, making sure that as we grow and as we develop as an industry, we've got to make sure that we carry our people with us. So one of the things, of course, that I then wanted to start with is a conversation around, I guess, this just transition. And there's some interesting work that we really recently did, and it was with the Presidential Climate Commission as well as the NBI, where we're looking at, of course, the context of our climate aspirations and all of those things and how they contextualize, of course, to the investments that need to come into play. And the NBI has been working with a couple of big organizations, I think in partnership with BCG, a consulting firm as well, really to start to do these sector vertical kind of deep modeling pieces to understand just what does this mean as we step into this just transition. It's an important conversation, of course, because it impacts this particular sector as well. And so I ask and say, how do we think about the just transition in the context? And maybe even start contextually and say, what is it? Right, and ensuring that, one, we share the same definition as we talk about it also, but then we understand the implications. So just at a macro level, the ambitions that are detailed in the PCC, or Presidential Climate Commission, around our transition out of course, kind of coal-led and I guess internal combustion engines, ultimately moving to electric vehicles, the ambition is that we have 1 million electric vehicles by 2035. The challenge around that is that for us to meet those ambitions, we would need to be generating, one, bringing on, I guess, new electricity availability of about 6,000 to 7,000 megawatts per annum. We've only brought that much capacity over the last 5 years. And so that is one of the things that is a challenge and says, well, when we think about this industry, and who is it going to impact as well? And so when you look at a commodity level, I guess, which also comes into this conversation because we are an industry that is still largely, of course, internal combustion engines, and therefore we've got a number of pressure points that are coming. The UK and Europe are writing their own ambitions about importing, particularly ICE or internal combustion engines, and that they're sunsetting that by 2035. I think that's the year. The implication is that you've got to ask two things. On the one side is that how does this inform what our demand context is going to look like, given the fact that we are trading partners with them from an export point of view, from a vehicles perspective. Are we going to need to redirect our demand in our trading context? And so we're going to look for new trading partners. Are we going to double click into an Africa free continental trade opportunity and start to move the vehicles into the rest of the continent as well? I mean, because again, when you look at our trade context with intra-Africa, it's still only about 23 to 24% of overall trade. And so when we think about this kind of Africa free continental trade agreement, what does that mean with the pressure point that's happening, with the commitments that are happening there, with also what we're doing in terms of our manufacturing context from a vehicle point of view. And so even when you look at the work that has come out of the Presidential Climate Commission, actually it's mostly the NBI who's actually done the analysis around what is going to be lost and what's going to be gained. The PGMs are an interesting one because we know, of course, platinum group, particularly rhodium, palladium, and platinum goes into the auto-catalytic converters. Now when, of course, those cars are being sunsetted, what does it mean for the PGMs? Interestingly enough, platinum comes in quite nicely as well, or at least the group of metals, in the hydrogen economy. And so while we're thinking about components of the industry that may come under pressure, and so I think if you look at, I guess, platinum prices in the short to medium term, they're probably going to come under quite a bit of pressure, but I think there is a sunrise opportunity that is coming there as well. And so when we think about this industry, the components that are sunsetting, I think there's an equal component that is sunrising as well. And so we've got to think about that as we think about, I guess, the macro things also impacting our industry. One of the things we're also seeing globally is this rise of digital civility. And by digital civility is that how we're living our lives as being entirely moving towards, I guess, a digital enablement of living our lives. We're seeing supermarkets now having self-checkout terminals, etc. KFC has recently invested in an AI-based drive-through, for example, to leverage data to be able to know what's the peak time to sell a streetwise to and all of those things. And so when we're thinking about our industry as well, what's the digital civility component, I think, that we ought to be strategizing when we're sitting in our boardrooms? When you look up and when we think about kind of the rise of the electric vehicle, the EV, will it mean that maybe dealerships are going to live right next to petrol stations? Will it mean that petrol stations will become office parks as well because people are charging their cars and they're working? But those are some of the questions that I think for me, when we think about kind of the macro shifts that are happening in your industry, contextualized by the shifts that are happening globally, you've got to bring that into your thinking and really start to think about what does the future of the leadership look like, contextualized by what we're seeing in terms of digital civility, where we're using digital to give us our civil experiences. And so I think that's one of the things that I think is going to inform some of the transitions we're going to see in this sector. And I think it touches onto the next point I want to talk about, which I won't double click on because it gets quite technical from an economics point of view. But it's this idea of export sophistication as well as industrial kind of upgrading. And when we think now, KUKA is currently in Japan, and they're looking at, I'm trying to think of the conference that they're attending there. But again, we've got to think about, for all the investments that we've made in South Africa, particularly I'll use, KUKA as an example, and we see what's happening with Mercedes-Benz. We've seen what's happened also, of course, in the Tshwane area from an OEM point of view. When we think about the context of those investments, one of the first things that we come through of is the benefits of what we call agglomeration or cluster theory. And simply it talks about when you think about putting economic nodes together in an agglomerated and a clustered approach, you actually can start to see some industrial upgrading that takes place. And so when we think about your context as a dealer economy as well, what is the cluster theory reality that can inform your own industrial upgrading? And I think those are some of the questions that I want us to think about as we're saying there's lots of moving parts in the context of our industry, but this is also, I think, helping us ask critical questions about where opportunity really lies in the context of our economy. Of course, getting into the policy conversation, everyone knows for one EV coming into their country, about 40% of that cost price goes to taxation. So we're saying to National Treasury, you can't have a lack of policy cohesion. On the one side, you've got a progressive taxation regime that actually kind of, wants to squeeze out this green economy that you want to talk about. And so how do you also, I think as a dealer economy, start to collect your own thinking? And this is the part I talk about thought leadership. We've got to educate policymakers about how their policy decisions impact how our reality translates. And so certainly, as we are then thinking about that, we've got a taxation regime that is actually productive insofar as we've still got ambitions of having a certain number of EVs, et cetera, et cetera. And so all of the things, I think, are realities for you guys because you're ordering those EVs as well, et cetera, et cetera. It's translating to demand context for your consumers and all of those things. And so certainly, I think, one of the things that we really must be quite intentional about as we think about the policy context. I remember some time when I was doing some analysis, again, which is talking to this idea around this lack of cohesion from a policy point of view, and it's just anecdotal. I was looking at what's kind of in the NDP, National Development Plan. I'd looked at IPAP, which is the industrial policy, and NDP says, labor first, and it's kind of, it is about labor absorptive industries. When you look at IPAP, it's capital intensive. And so then I went and looked at some numbers, and I said, let's follow the money. And you started seeing that wherever IDC was putting money, it was mostly in the capital-intensive industries. And so on the one side, you've got kind of overarching policy ambition around labor intensity, yet the things that you're building subsidies for, et cetera, through an incentive framework is going to a capital-first context. And so I think sometimes, and this is why I'm bringing this up, we've got to educate the policymakers when there's no cohesion in the thinking, as well as in ultimately what will become the reality. One of the interesting developments that are happening, particularly in the technology space, and I think Mark again just said cars are moving towards a space where it's technology on wheels, in essence, is we started seeing the development of what we call regulatory sandboxes, which is an interesting thing for me, and I really like the fact that we're seeing this kind of development. One, it says, and we've seen it launch in South Africa, but particularly looking at the fintech space, which was one of the kind of intergovernmental working groups looking at how kind of a lot of fintech developments are going to impact, and it was issues around payments, etc. And there was one that was actually recently launched that came out of that sandbox. But the value of a regulatory sandbox simply says, we understand the shifts that are taking place in the market. We understand that regulation right now is not fit for purpose to respond to those shifts. We understand there's innovation that's taking place. Let's put all these people in one room and let's help figure out what kind of regulatory framework will support the kind of growth that we want to see. And so I think this is something that's going to impact this sector, which is also largely impacted by this divergence or convergence happening in the ICT space. So all the developments that are happening from a tech point of view is going to have a big impact in the way in which your dealer experience translates as well. And so certainly I think when we're thinking about these regulatory sandboxes, I think we must also contextualize it into how it translates into some of the retail markets, particularly I think from an automotive point of view. And of course, which is coming back to a little bit of the conversation I said about cluster theory and agglomeration. The government came out with a district development model, which in essence was a recognition of the fact that sometimes centralizing policy making becomes quite difficult. And in fact, there's an entire body of literature in the economic space called ELF, I think it's Ethnic and Linguistic Fractionalization. And simply it talks about when you have an ethnically diverse economy, policy making becomes incredibly difficult. Of course, it makes sense, right? Because how do you get everyone to think in the same way and then to move in the same way? And so this body of literature really starts to explain why we've got some complexities around the pace of policy making. What DDM then does is says we create a district development model where maybe we can move quicker in then putting together policies that can help us move. So again, what I want to help us think about today is how do we think about a DDM and a cluster theory and how it translates into a retail experience from a dealership point of view. These are some of the questions that I really want us to start to think about as we say that we're wanting to reimagine what growth looks like in a changing and a complex market. And so I'm bringing all of these things just to think about that. How do you get into a conversation with Transnet and help them think about what does a meaningful integrated transport system look like in the way in which it translates into good delivery of parts, of vehicles, etc. And so you've really got to bring it back into this conversation. This is what the real social compact looks like. This is the real social contract in the way in which we get to the materiality of it, and we're already bringing solutions as well, because all of the things, the delays of delivery of goods to your dealerships has got material implications, parts, etc. So these are all the things that we've got to think about. We live in a context where we've got to have an integrated transport system. How do all the policy pressure points that currently exist impact how we operate in today's context? And let's lead and take the conversation to the policymakers. And certainly, I think, then brings me back to the last conversation, which is around leaving no human behind. And there's some work I did for one of the telcos some time ago, which was around what I termed the fourth citizen. And simply, I asked them, do you, one, have a picture of what your fourth industry-ready employee looks like today and what it ought to look like tomorrow? And do you have a view around where your current audit currently stands? And so simply, we've got to understand, even in the context of this setting, there is a difference between digital skills and skills for a digital future. And so when we think about our own human capital development, Paul Romer, who was a Nobel laureate, one of the pieces of work he won, I guess, the Nobel for, was around, I guess, his discovery of the endogenous growth theory, which in essence he says that the growth path can't, and the innovation in that growth path can't happen absent of the human. And so oftentimes we used to think of technology as this thing that comes into the system as an exogenous contributor into the system of growth. And says, no, it's actually the human development process that also accelerates the process of innovation and growth in technology. And so if you're thinking about also transforming your own dealerships, how does your endogenous growth context look like when we think about some of the policy frame or some of the kind of big economic thinking has informed or has given us some thinking and inspiration about really how to reimagine growth? Also, the new economic laureates, I think from last year, I'm trying to remember their names, they did some experiments, again, around the role of minimum wage on employment outcomes. And they found that actually, an increase in minimum wage does not have negative impact on employment outcomes. And so when we look at the context that we've got in the South African economy, where most of the people are working poor, and when you call working poor, is when you are working, but you're still living beneath the living wage, which is about 7,700. 71% of the people in the economy live beneath that. And some of them work in your dealerships as well. And so when you're thinking about the wage context, they actually found that it increased what we call total factor productivity. And so, again, when you're thinking about, you've got a constrained economic environment, but you also in the fight for human capital. So how do you balance the thinking beyond just a basic people want increases conversation? And so really, I think as part of the conversation around leaving no human behind, this is part of a macro conversation in South Africa in general around wages and how that translates into productivity outcomes for enterprises. And so that's one of the conversations that I really thought was important. The second one is there's a body of, or StatsSA comes out with the quarterly employment statistics every quarter, excuse me. And what comes out of that is two interesting developments for me. The first is it's showing that the economy is substituting full-time jobs for part-time jobs. And so you're seeing growth in part-time roles and kind of a trickling off. And so it might look like you've got employment gains, but those are part-time. That tells you one of two things. One, it means enterprises are a little bit trepidatious in choosing their investment decisions. And so they're feeling a little bit uncertain about making investment decisions. And so we're more willing to keep part-time staff in our business. The challenge is that it's difficult for you to remain competitive when you do that. And so one of the things is that we've really got to, I think, work through the resilience that's within us as well to say, how do we fight through the battle, keeping the employees along our journey as well? Because also they lose psychological safety in the businesses when they become part-time. And when you've got people who don't have psychological safety, there's an entire body of literature about then behavioral economics that follow. So it's really, I think, an important thing. The second one is there's something we call underemployment in South Africa, or in general in the study of economics. And underemployment is one of the few things that StatsSA doesn't really overtly publish when they publish their unemployment numbers. But in the simplest way to explain what it is, it's the number of people who are overqualified for the roles in which they're occupying. And that's about 900,000. Tells you that we haven't done skills planning meaningfully in a way in which we can inform how we invest to also support our growth. So from a skills point of view, and how does that journey? And so what does your fourth citizen look like so that you don't have underemployment issues? You know, and so you'll find that in every of the dealerships, you have someone who's got honors in economics, but, they're just doing sales. And is that an effective use of a rich skill? And so I think this is something we must think about in the context of our own ambitions to not leave anyone behind. Is how does it translate into our view of our fourth citizen? How does it translate to our own commitment to our people? How does it translate into killing the zombie ideas? And that's Paul Krugman wrote a whole book about all these zombie ideas that they get killed and then they come back as zombies and it becomes a conversation all over again. So it's proven that increasing minimum wage won't result in negative outcomes. In fact, it does result in productivity improvements. And so when we think and say we are in a sector that is still struggling with transformation, I think this is an opportunity for you guys to rethink even the conversation itself about transformation, the texture of the conversation, in a way in which it really starts to show a contextual and a nuanced understanding of what your own ambitions are and how it's going to translate into your human capital investment. And that, of course, brings us to the end of our conversation. And as I said, there is a drum beat. It is loud, and you can't afford to miss a beat. What are the drum beats that are impacting your industry? Thank you very much.
Again, I'm going to ask you to hang 10, and thank you for that presentation. I think that was the loudest, quiet drum beat I've heard in my life. I don't know about you guys in this room, but I think you summed it up quite well in terms of those notes from the transition, the energy transition policy, as well as the transformation issue of leaving no one behind in terms of skills and in terms of the wage. But question time for Sipho, and if there are any questions in this room for him. Sfiso, so sorry. Questions for Sfiso? Okay, any questions online? So I have a question for you, and so I get to interact with a lot of you, a few of you in this room as a journalist, either from what you say on the broadcast platforms or what is said in terms of the written work. And you mentioned Europe, a very important market for the car market in South Africa, and how they perhaps are ahead of us in terms of the just energy transition and the cars that they'll be accepting from us come 2030 and the cars that they won't. But you also mentioned Africa, and I would like to understand from your point of view whether you think our market here is tapping into the African potential as much as they can, as much as they should, particularly if it is a matter whereby we're not ready to meet European standards right now. I mean, is Africa a nice cushion to soften that potential blow?
Sure, and I mean, so very quick answer to your question is that no, we're not tapping into it enough. I think that's quite straightforward. And what's going to be quite interesting is because even when you go into even a static context, you'll see kind of a lot of Chinese vehicles coming in there, etc. And when we think about, I guess, being dealer principals, when we think about our own, I guess, dealerships as well, how do you start to think about kind of a growing market outside of our borders as well? How do you think about new opportunities for franchising as well into brands that are already entrenched there, but you've got a more sophisticated enterprise model, an enterprise operating model that you can assist in the setting up of some of those franchises. So I think before we even get into an Africa Free Continental Trade Agreement, I don't think we're even asking enough questions about thinking about our own dealership frameworks and how could that open new opportunities in Zambia, in Namibia, in Lesotho, etc.
Sure.
And I think those are some of the things that maybe could inspire our own thinking here as well in terms of what does growth look like for us in the context of our market. And as I said, I don't think the continent is going to be in a rush to completely sunset internal combustion engines. And so it might be then that now is the time to start investing in those relationships, to start rerouting where your vehicles will be going as broadly as an export industry, but also from your dealerships. And what does that translate into an integrated transport system? How do those cars move from here to there? So you've got to partner with SARS in the custom context. You've got to Transnet. You've got to, do you know what I mean? All of those things.
Sure.
And I think these are some of the questions that we ought to be asking ourselves in how we're meaningfully tapping into the Africa opportunity.
Okay. All right, there is a question. Could I ask the gentleman to stand? All right, and a mic to be brought to you. Okay. All right, there's this gentleman right here.
Hi, Sfiso. You mentioned something about the level of influence or engagement with policymakers. And I guess if we go back to Fifi's question about the continent, the importance of engaging with the relevant policymakers in the continent. And I have some insights through the AAAM and the work that they're doing, which is an industry body, of course, with different parts of the continent. I just want to ask you, what is the level of appetite in the South Africa context with the policymakers, particularly in the subjects that you've already touched on? Because I think it's quite important, I mean, to have a good collaboration amongst many stakeholders, of which government and policymakers are quite crucial in that conversation.
Sure. And I'll answer that question both through a policymaker lens and through other, meaningful stakeholders in that context. I think it's a mixed story, it's a mixed bag. At National Treasury, I think you're a lot more likely to have a lot more good ears. And so the transformation of the tax framework for electric vehicles, I think, will land on relatively fertile ears. And they engage on a regular basis around kind of design aspects of taxation systems as well, particularly leading up to the two budgets, right, midterm budget as well as the main budget in February. And so I think in the context of what it means for you guys today, you definitely can accelerate that conversation with National Treasury. I think you've got fertile ears at Transnet. I think they're keen to partner. They're keen, and they're a transforming organization at this point in time. And I've got relative proximity to the sense that they're quite keen to support the transport integration or the integration of the transport system. I think at other levels, if you're thinking about what are kind of meaningful incentive structures that you can put to support the industry, I'm not entirely sure yet that the DTIC is at that level in terms of their own sense of inspiration about the use of incentive structures to energize growth. And so I think it's still a conversation you could meaningfully take there, but I think it might be a long slog to really get them to think and say, how do we build a model to incentivize certain consumption in the retail space for automotives? I don't know, I haven't kind of conceptualized what an incentive structure for the automotive retail space, but I mean, these are some of the things that you guys can start to put together. And so I think some of the policymakers are there, some others I think are a little bit, on the mass literacy side, but I think overall, I think you certainly can still get them over the line.
All right. I love your description of people that will listen. Fertile ears. Yeah. Use that in future. There's a question that has come to you or for you from the online audience, and it is related to the production of greener vehicles and the effectiveness of carbon taxes to ramping up production of greener vehicles. Your take on that?
In a global context, yes, it is. In a South African context, I think we're still quite far away, because the enterprises most impacted by carbon taxation is Sasol, right? They are the biggest emitter at this point in time. And yes, they're thinking about their investments into wheeling energy, and this is the launch of the wind farms that they've got. They're thinking in terms of green hydrogen, etc. So they're thinking in participating in the creation of new forms of energy for sure, but not necessarily geared towards vehicles per se. And so I think in South African context, I think would mean contextualized to who are the emitters and why then that would translate. But I think globally, there's definitely a shift and an impetus that is accelerating that. And I mean, quite an interesting thing I've been thinking about in its work that we're working on in the sustainability space is that when you think about carbon, initially it was just something that goes into the ether. And then eventually people started realizing, oh, there are clouds that don't look so great. And then now we don't, and then they started studying how much people are emitting. And then eventually there became an entire economic market for carbon trading and carbon taxes, etc. And so when we think about the S in the S in ESG, when it's the social component, again, it's this thing that everyone feels like it's a bit elusive.
Sure.
But it can translate exactly how carbon was something that went into the ether. When we think about our social investments, it can actually ultimately get into being something that's tradable as well. And so I just had a bit of a kind of a back thought as I was thinking about carbon and its evolution in ultimately becoming an economic resource in the way
Sure.
in which we look at it as well.
Okay. Just the last one from me, and it is on the wages, because I think that you did make reference to the fact that there's quite a number of people who are working poor. And you made reference to the fact that perhaps some of them are even in the dealerships that some of you run. And I'd like to think that people would like to pay as many people as they can a good working wage. But then you've got diesel bills that you're having to foot because of the power cuts that we experienced this morning. Now water is a real issue, and that's becoming a big business risk. And you've got a whole lot of decisions that are being made at the top that are not getting the economy growing. And perhaps if the economy was pumping, we would have fewer working poor people. You did say it's a tough balancing act. But given your conversations with a few policymakers, are their ears fertile to doing the things that can perhaps help some of the people in this room pay better wages?
Ooh, Fifi, I mean, there are two things I want to address. The first is, I think there's another zombie idea in South Africa that if the economy grows, employment grows. And we've had 13 years of jobless growth. So there was positive economic growth, but jobs weren't coming. So this idea that there's trickle-down economics in South Africa, I think, is also, a continuous idea that we disprove over and over again. And so it doesn't necessarily hold true that even if the infertile bunch did everything right, doesn't mean we would do everything right at an enterprise level.
All right.
And so I think that's the first thing. The second thing is that you are correct, that there's a dearth of availability of fertile ears in this space. But also, I like to look at the world through bodies of work in the economic space. Nudge economics and chaos theory. Nudge economics, simply, when David Cameron became PM in the UK, he built an entire behavioral economics team to look at things like nudge on the back of Robert Thaler, etc. But it's like, how do you nudge behavioral change? So even as an industry, if you want people to move from consuming one car to another, you've got to nudge them out of the one consumption pattern into another. And so that's one of the things that we haven't understood as well, is around the opportunity that is there for us to nudge a behavioral experience.
Okay.
Chaos theory, which comes back to the point, says, do you have a good view of the system where you then can know that which cog in the system will give me the biggest multiplicative or reverberating effect, which is often also talked about as butterfly theory. Mm-hmm. And so in the context of then these infertile bunch, we've got to be able to look at the system and say, who's the one who's fertile, who can actually give us the biggest impact? Because we're not going to change all politicians overnight. And so I think even as we think about which policymakers we want to talk to, we've got to look at it through that lens. And when we see a view of the system, who can give us the biggest bang for our buck? And just lastly, on the kind of living and working poor, one of the projects I ran for one of the banks some years ago was around eradication of poverty within the business. And simply what we asked them is that, do you understand? So the way we study poverty in the country is through what we call multidimensional poverty. And so you experience it through education, through health, nutrition, social mobility, and infrastructure in general. And so I asked them, I said, do you know how many people here don't eat 3 meals a day? Do you know how many people are first-generation degree holders? Do you know how many people in the business are the only ones with a medical aid, etc.? And so we ended up doing this in-company assessment, and we found 43% of the people were exposed to at least one pillar of poverty. But then the transformation that followed is that we said everyone who was a first generation degree holder, let's put them on a management acceleration program because we know the returns to education in the context of their communities. And so I think even when we think about finding innovative solutions to solving this idea of people working poor, it's not just about wages, but it's about recognizing the exposure to poverty that they have and leveraging your own tools and assets as a business that may not cost you that much, but that can actually translate into meaningful value, I think, for your workers.
Okay. Okay, with that, thank you. Thank you. And I, once again, apologize for my rookie era. Took me back to primary school when Sifiso was Sipo. And, but yeah, Sifiso's Kenjane, ladies and gentlemen. So we have another poll for you before we call up our next speaker. And we're talking about used car pricing. Seen a big correction in used car pricing in the last 3 to 4 months. Okay, so consensus, yes, but the scale is slightly different. The degree to which there has been that correction. All right. So the first column would probably be someone from Transaction Capital. Who works at Transaction Capital? Story for another day. So let's push on, and we're going to speak to the, or rather, let's actually get a commentator on that. Roy, you're there.
Yes.
Right.
Sorry, I think if we go back to the used vehicle market and that, I think we've all just seen there's been a massive change, you know, and I think those guys that were close to their businesses saw it coming as the new OEMs were starting to load up the stock, but within a period of, I think, 4 months, pricing in the used market, I think, has adjusted substantially. And I think those guys that were napping have been caught in a position where they've got a lot of vehicles that are overpriced in their used car lots. But I think the market is sort of pulling those through substantially, you know, well, slowly as the guys are writing them back. And I think the market's going to stabilize over the next couple of months. But obviously, we're going to go back to the level where, you know, a used car is now at a used car price, which is below the level of the new car.
Okay. So before the pandemic happened.
Yeah, well, you know, when we had all the new car stock shortages, obviously, I mean, I think we were all selling our demos at over retail, and there was a whole premium on a used vehicle. Now that, I mean, if you go to the Colfontaine yards, it is, you know, all the OEMs are bulging with stock. So the dealers are happy to do a deal on a new car at a reduced price, which obviously then reduces the price of the used cars in the market.
Okay. All right. No, good to know. Well, as a consumer, obviously, I'm very happy that there's a correction. I mean, I do understand that your industry got a much needed support in terms of those dynamics in the supply chain, particularly in the used car market, as a result of the destruction caused by the pandemic. But on the receiving end, as a consumer, it's good to see prices going back to normal. So those who didn't ride on that wave higher, sorry for you. But our next speaker is going to perhaps help you and enlighten you on making your respective dealers and your respective companies perform better, particularly in this complex economic environment that Sifiso did paint the picture of. So how to grow within a backdrop of complexity, essentially. And he is based in Australia, but is with us. He's come all the way. All the way. His name is David Lowry, Group Head of People and Product at MSXI, and he's a global thought leader on unlocking company performance through employee engagement. And I'd like to ask you to help me welcome him on stage, David.
Welcome. Thanks for having me. There's lots been going on in the last little while, and I must say I'm very happy to be here. Despite my youthful and windswept appearance, I've been in the business improvement game for about 30 years. And about 20 years ago, actually 20 years ago to the year, Clive and I were talking about this earlier, I bumped into a fellow called Paddy O'Brien. And Paddy took me under his wing and introduced me to the automotive industry. And it was quite a life-changing experience for me. He took me into what he called the beating heart of the retail business. And I learnt an awful lot. And it's been quite a journey. That was 20 years ago, and I'm still here. Lots have changed. And one of the other things that Paddy did was brought me here to South Africa. And working with a team of South Africans and coming here as regularly as I did, I've developed quite a deep affinity for the place and the people, more importantly, because much like Australia, we've got a range of unique people, very interesting characters, and quite a few larrikins out there who work in this retail space and really make it tick. So I'm quite honoured to be here for the second time as a result. My role, which actually changed a little while ago, earlier this month, I'm the global head of learning solutions for MSX. So I'm a bit like Sinbad the Sailor. I travel around the world, I work with all of these different OEMs and companies and help them set their people and retail network development strategies. And in the process, I pick up all of these little bits of information and it all sort of rattles around in here for a little while. And it sort of gives me a very interesting perspective on the world too, because I always try and drag everything back, courtesy of Paddy, to how it impacts you, the dealers, and the people in the retail network as a whole. And it does. I mean, it's interesting that I've followed an economist, because I'm going to talk about a few things and express a few views which might be a bit controversial. But I want to talk about some of the things that are going on in the world that are going to trickle down and impact us here at dealer level. I mean, we're this small part of this great big global thing. It's like what we call the ripple effect, where it doesn't matter where in the pond you drop the rock, all the ripples are going to get to the edge somehow. And these things are going to trickle down to us over time. And the way I thought I would do it is do like a pest analysis, and just go through and say, well, let's look at some of the political, economic, social and technological things that are going on out there that are going to impact us in automotive retail. So when we talk about the political side, I mean, we've just heard about a lot of the things to do with EVs and things like that, and I want to focus on that just for a moment. Let's look at some of the markets now where they've almost made it, in the Netherlands, it's cost prohibitive to buy an internal combustion engine car. They put so many tariffs and things on them that it spawned this whole used car importing hybrids and EVs from other markets. And they've really driven the whole EV structure in there. So to the point where if you get off at the airport there and go and find a taxi, it'll be spot the ICE car, because the majority of them are all EVs. Now that's okay. Switzerland's done the same thing. Norway's done the same thing. And a lot of other markets and political people are trying to push the same thing with their own agenda in different areas. To be seen to be green. Okay? Small problem. Okay? Number one. The first thing that happened with the Netherlands and with Switzerland was, what about our power grid? Now, heaven forbid that they were here and had to go what we go through. I mean, imagine here with your EV. Hi, honey, I'm just popping down the shops to get the Sunday paper, but it's Thursday. Yeah, but I got to charge the car. So they then realised that they had to import electricity. So Germany made out like bandits, because all of this electricity for the Netherlands and for Switzerland and what have you comes from Germany. So they have to import this stuff. I mean, and keep in mind, these are small countries. They're not large. I mean, Netherlands is flat as this stage, so the closest thing they get to a hill is a speed bump. So it sort of makes sense to have an EV and get around, right? But then because of the strain on their power grids, and these are mature markets, I read recently where both the Netherlands and Switzerland said to their residents, we're really sorry, but if there's a state of emergency, we're switching off the charging grid and you can't charge your car. How the hell is that going to work? Imagine sitting at home watching the news. Russia's just, decided they want to stop throwing rocks at Ukraine and send a nuclear missile to you sitting in Switzerland. What do you do? To everyone with a normal car, jump in your 30-year-old Hilux and get out of town. To those of you with an EV, put your head between your knees, adopt the brace position, and kiss yourself goodbye. So, it's not without its challenges. And we touched on it as well with some of the markets talking about we're going to be completely EV focused by certain amounts, but there's a real issue with diesels at the moment. And both in France and in England, they're saying, okay, no more diesel vehicles past 2025. And in Germany, they're saying, stop making them. At some point, that's going to trickle down and influence and impact us. And to give you an idea of how quickly this is taking place, last year in June, I took my family to Germany. We're going to Austria to compete in the World Cup Mountain Bike Championships. So we had a bunch of bikes and all sorts of crap with us. So I'd booked quite a big vehicle to take us all there. Arrive at the airport, go pick up my vehicle, and they said, oh, we've changed your vehicle. I said, why? And they said, oh, well, it was a diesel and we no longer rent diesel vehicles. Okay. So then I had to work out how to fit everything in, a smaller vehicle somehow, which was a challenge in itself. But so it's already impacting different parts of the business because they're, moving away from these vehicles. And, we see that in a lot of places now where there's this view that we need to be seen to be green and pushing the whole EV bandwagon. Is it the answer though? Okay, let's talk about economic stuff. And here I'm going to get right down to grassroots level. Because one of the challenges that we're going to have, and I guess if I take a step back for a moment, we talked about EVs. One of the things we haven't talked about here today is alternative fuels. And you've only got to go to some of the other markets. You go to Germany and you see all of the work they're doing on synthetic fuel. And you've got two very different schools of thoughts coming from different ways, and there's OEMs involved in this. Like Volkswagen's investing so heavily in alternative fuels, and particularly synthetic fuel. MotoGP and Formula One are all moving to 50% synthetic fuels. And by 2035, they'll be fully synthetic. So they've already worked out how to make it, and there's different approaches. And one is, quite interestingly, that they can take any carbon-based form and turn it into a synthetic fuel. So in some ways, that's pretty cool because they can take a dirty nappy and turn it into fuel for your car. The hard part is making it cost-effective. So, but that's going to happen because, I think that maybe EVs are just a bridging technology, or that we'll see a different form of EV. And again, when we go down the path, we go to Japan. Japan's fully focused on hydrogen. All of their nuclear power points are converted to run on what's called red hydrogen, and they're very, very committed to making hydrogen work. You've got companies like JCB and all of the big truck companies in Europe all drilling into hydrogen, looking at how they can use hydrogen. Because the neat part about hydrogen, it can be used multiple ways. So obviously you can convert an internal combustion engine to run on hydrogen. But one of the really neat technologies I saw recently was where they took hydrogen, because it's very inefficient and it's not great for the environment to harvest hydrogen. And it's very inefficient to transport it because you lose tremendous amounts of the gas. One of the neat things I saw was they mixed it up with this magnesium and a few other things and created a paste. And what they did, they put it in these canisters. And they worked out that they could get so much power out of this stuff that when they put it into an EV to charge the battery, they tripled the range of the car. And the cool part about that was that, we think of service stations maybe being a thing of the past. But in this case, you could pull up at a service station, pull the canister out, pop it over here, grab another one, put it in, and off you go. So where that's taking off is in the aircraft side and with heavy vehicles. Because one of the challenges we have with heavy vehicles in South Africa, like Australia, you know, our rail network is, you know, one step above complete crap. So we rely heavily on trucks. But the problem is with an EV truck is if you've got say a 40-ton payload and 5 tons is taken up in batteries and it's going to take you how long to charge it? How's that going to work? So I think that we need to think about alternative fuels, and one of the challenges we're going to have from a dealership perspective is how are we going to upskill our EV and alternative fuel technicians? What are we going to do? You know, and it's also the impact of the after-sales business with EVs, because that's this massive grey area. What does my after-sales department do with an EV? Well, we replace wiper blades and pollen filters at the moment. What else do we do? You know, so there's this, you know, what are we going to do with that? So on one hand, we're asking a guy who is really good at rebuilding motors and gearboxes and diagnosing faults in a vehicle to suddenly be a computer engineer or electronics engineer. Okay, how does that one work? So we need to think about, as these things are coming at us, and they will come at us in one way, shape or form, we need to have a plan at dealership level about what are we going to do to make sure we've got the people who can do this. And of course, the other part of that is what does my after-sales area look like? I mean, we were rolling out and prepping dealers for an EV launch recently. And one of the things that they had to do was have a separate area to do everything, and they had to have a fireproof room. And they have a fireproof room because if the EV decides to spontaneously combust, they push it into this room with a forklift and shut the doors and let it burn for 3 days. And that's fact. And only in the last week, there was an Audi dealership in Singapore that just exploded because the EV caught fire inside, and it just went up the workshop just went up in a cloud of flames and dust. And of course, as we get to all these different types of products, what's our dealership going to be like anyway, even from a sales perspective? Because suddenly we're asking a sales guy who could, you know, sell you any sort of car you like to explain an EV to someone, or how does this hydrogen fuel cell car work? Or where do I go to find my synthetic fuel to fill up this car? So there's a whole raft of challenges there from a retail perspective. Socially, all sorts of social issues. I mean, it's, you know, and there's a lot of the pressure around electric vehicles, for example, is driven by this social need to be seen to be green and things like that as well. The problem I have with that, and this is a controversial one I know, is that I think we've been marketed to very well. Because if you draw a ring around or put a bubble around an EV, you can say what a great thing it is. No emissions, no nothing. How cool is that? Look at this dirty internal combustion engine thing here. Look at the gas it pumps out. What people don't do is put a ring around the factory where it's made. How far, because people don't understand that there's all sorts of emissions and stuff that go into building an electric vehicle over and above a normal car. All right, so how far do you think you'd have to drive that car to offset that? Does anyone want to give me a hazard a guess? How many kilometres would you have to do to offset all the nasty crap that we pumped into the air and in the environment building that car? It's about 450,000 kilometres. All right? So let's not kid ourselves, okay? And then what do we do with the battery when we're finished with it? You know, we talked about all the nasty stuff. Where does that go? Food for thought. But the customers also are driving this whole change in the retail experience. They're saying to us that I call it me-tailing, where it's me. I want to be in control of my retail experience. I want to dictate the terms and how I go about this process. And it's really, really changing the way that we have to sort of think. And the other challenge is is that I'm working with some OEMs now in markets where they have 4 different retail models. So they've got traditional dealers, they've got signature sites, they've got company-owned deals and agency models, and then what they do is they dabble in this whole digital space and say, well, okay, we're going to release this new car, but you can only buy it online. I mean, how confusing is this? Then they say to me, hey, Dave, can you help us out because none of our processes work anymore? And I'm saying, I'm not bloody surprised. Look at this. Did you think about this going forward? And then we've got a range of other digital solutions. So as a company, we've built a lot of virtual showrooms. And what happens is that when you're on the website looking at your car, you click on a link and it takes you through, we've got a reconditioned warehouse. It's all flashed out. There's cars there and cameras everywhere. You talk to a live consultant and he takes you around the car and does all of this stuff. But when it comes to the buying part of it, he has to then direct you to a dealer. So how's this all going to fit in? And we need to be thinking about this from a dealership perspective because these things are coming at us. They're there, they're in play, they're happening, rightly, wrongly, or otherwise. Let's talk about technology. Oh my goodness, who here, we all know that in our pocket, we've all got a mobile phone like this. This has more computing power than Apollo 11 that took man to the moon, all right? Now, one of the things that I do in my role is we build a lot of learning technology and different platforms to do things. And we talk about the way we build it up and we cost things. We talk about lines of computer code when we're building our costing models. We're saying we're going to develop this platform. It should have about 350,000 to 500,000 lines of computer code to build it, etc., etc. Who here watched Top Gun Maverick? Come on, hands up. Who watched Top Gun Maverick? My kids drive me mad with it, by the way, but yes. Okay. What planes did they fly in Top Gun Maverick? What were they? F-22s? F-18s, old ones. Okay, sorry, I used to be in aerospace. If you think about the model after that, which is an F-22, it has 1.7 million lines of computer code that drive it, okay? Not bad, you think. If we go one step further and we look at an F-35 Raptor, the most lethal airborne killing machine known to man, 5.7 million lines of computer code operate that thing. Okay? That's a lot. Now, I flew here from Australia on a 787 Dreamliner. There are 6.9 million lines of computer code that drive that plane. Now, if I go out and I buy a reasonably spec'd vehicle, it has all of the safety gear, it has a nice infotainment system, Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, it's got sat-nav, all of this sort of stuff. How many lines of computer code are in that car? Does anyone want to have a guess? There are 20 million lines of computer code in the sat-nav. There are 130 million lines of computer code in that car. All right? Compare that to your 787 Dreamliner. And that's, before I go and look at anything too flash like a hybrid, or if I go to an EV where there's about 330 million lines of computer code. And let's not even go to autonomous driving just yet. But when we think about that, this pace of this change is phenomenal. Once upon a time, they used to talk about the fact that computing power will double every 2 years. Not the case anymore. And it's not just the power of the computer, it's the size of the components that are shrinking. Yet here we are, and all of this technology is happening, and it's all changing, and we're at a dealership level expected to cope with this and have people who can diagnose and fix and repair things. And we've got to sell it and explain this to a customer. The fastest growing part of my solutions portfolio is actually now customer education. Because the car companies are realising that they're really struggling with educating the customers on what to do with the stuff they've got in their car. Particularly when we get down to this whole ADAS model with this advanced driver assistance systems and autonomous control. So trying to explain a lot of this, it's like me trying to explain how to use an iPhone to my mother. That was an epic effort, I've got to tell you. But, you know, so we've got to do, but we're going to have to do the same thing. You know, it's really important to understand that, and the problem is no sooner is something rolled out and we've got our head around it, than there's an update and it's all changed. And with a lot of EVs and things, those updates happen while the car's sitting in the garage. And if something doesn't work on the update, like, you know, how many times is your phone updated and then something doesn't work? I mean, it's the bane of my life building apps, I can tell you right now. So they're going to come back to you as a dealer and say it's not working, and then somehow we've got to try and work out what's wrong. So all of these things are going to impact us here on the ground, okay? So forewarned is forearmed. That's, I guess, the best way to say it. We need to be thinking about this going forward. I mean, and you've only got to look at this picture from 1900. Here we go, you know, find the car. Oh yeah, there's one car on the picture. 10 years later, find the horse. There's one horse in the picture. So this isn't a new thing, but it's just happening at a far, far, far quicker rate. The speed of change is phenomenal. Now I want to get into I wanted to use that to sort of set the scene. Because as I said, this stuff is, you know, these ripples are coming to us across the pond. And whether we like it or not, we need to think about it. At the moment though, and this is an area that I think is really important, the biggest challenge we have, and it's not just our industry by the way, it's across the board, is building the next generation of automotive talent. Because I don't know what it was like here, but in Australia and particularly the US, we call it, you know, the US called it the Great Resignation. In Australia, we called it the Great Reshuffle. In Europe, they called it the same thing. But, you know, we came out of COVID and people just went, boom. Where did they all go? Because all of a sudden, one of the things that COVID taught us, by the way, was the value of people. Whether we liked it or not, it was a bit of a harsh lesson in that regard for some industries and some businesses in particular. But let's face it, there's 6 things that drive business performance, you know, and people's one of the top 3. Without them, we're history. So now we're in this situation where we've got a real challenge, because a lot of the first people that go are the good people because they can get the job somewhere else and get more money, and decide, well, I've got no cars to sell at the moment anyway, so why don't I just go over and do this and do this? And a lot of people took a complete U-turn or took a very diverse change in their career. So the first thing is we're going to have to cope with all these changing roles. So I talked before about the different retail models and the customer expectations and the changing vehicle specs, and the fact that, you know, we've got all of these new retail stuff, and all this is challenging what we see as the normal dealership model. And as I mentioned, we've got traditional technicians, they're really being challenged, and all these other roles are coming. But where the hell are we going to find these people? Where are we going to find them? That in itself is a challenge. How do we attract people to our industry? You know, I mentioned, it says up the top there that, you know, sales stalled a little bit post-COVID, and people just sort of went. A lot of them went to different things. So how do we attract people into automotive retail though? How many people, you know, and this is a real challenge, I guess not so much here, but definitely within our, if I look at Australia and some of the mature markets, no one finishes high school or university and says, I'm going to go off and be a service advisor, or I'm going to go off and sell cars. So what are we doing to attract people into our business? And particularly now, as we're going, well, okay, I've got this new role. What's this new role supposed to do? How it's supposed to operate? And how do I attract someone in to get them to do this new role? And so we need to think from a dealership perspective, we need to really sort of rethink our range of employee hygiene factors. And we need to change how our roles are sort of positioned, and really look at our dealership business as its own brand, and how are we as a dealership going to attract people? Because we're going to need to do that, okay? And somehow we've got to drive this talent attraction. Talent selection. This is an interesting one because I think that selecting the right talent is something that requires a major rethink. And, you know, when you think about the ways that different businesses go about this, I mean, let's look at Apple or Disney. What are the two main criteria they use to select people? It's attitude and personality, because they believe they can teach them the skills afterwards. I think in a lot of cases, we still focus on the skills. And, you know, we see this in some cases, particularly where company-owned stores are, or in some of our larger sort of academy models that we've got, where the OEM's now stepping in and saying, look, we need to we want to have a bit of a say in the people that you're putting in front of our customers. So, you know, therein lies a bit of a challenge. We've got, you know, I've just done some work in Malaysia with Proton. And what they're trying to do there is they're getting the dealers to go out, and some of the dealers are going out to the universities and talking to engineering and electrical engineering and computer graduates as they're finishing their program to say, look, this is the cool stuff we've got, come and work for us, and taking a different tack towards getting technicians who are going to work on EVs and things like that. And it's, you know, so we've got to look for a new way to sort of find these, you know, technical and frontline personnel. And we've got to get really clever with how we go about selecting and assessing them. And, you know, when you see, we've just built a massive assessment centre for the Volkswagen Group in Spain because they've already identified this as a big issue for them. So talent selection is an important thing. Let's get smart about how we pick our people as well. Employee engagement. Whoa, here we go. This is my pet topic. And I talk about this from multiple levels because an engaged employee is a very powerful thing. And I want to take a bit of a different tack before I get into this. So when I talk with OEMs about, you know, their retail network development and particularly their academy structures and all of this sort of stuff, I keep telling them the only thing they should look at in terms of measuring their return on investment around any of that stuff is learner and employee engagement. And I've been banging on about this for some time. Really interesting thing happened about a year ago with Hyundai in the US. Finally, the guy got sick of me talking about it, said, righto, clever clogs, show me how it works. So he set up all the stuff, I put in all the digital platforms, and we started to measure and look at the way people were being engaged and learning and things like that. And what happened is we saw over a period of 6 months, a 30% increase in employee and learner engagement. Conversely, what happened underneath that, because these were all technicians and after-sales people, is we saw a 23% improvement in fix-it-right first time. A 21% improvement in service satisfaction. So with the right, you know, with it from an OEM perspective, if you drive the right engagement, you're going to get the result. And it becomes for them and you know, a couple of other brands across Asia Pacific where we've sort of put this in place, it's their only measure they worry about now. From you as a dealership though, employee engagement's really important. It's a critical factor in keeping your people. So we've talked about how do we find the right people, how do we attract them, how do we select them. Now, how are we going to keep them? Because it costs money every time you have to employ someone or you lose someone. And it's not just the money, it's the intellectual property and all the other stuff that walks out the door with that individual. So we've got to look at a really neat way of sort of engaging your employees across a range of initiatives. And if you look at all the global companies, let's forget automotive for a moment, employee engagements for over 95% of the top global companies is their top priority. So they're seeing the value in this. And you know, for us, it's this new leadership. It's about keeping interested, informed, involved, and inspired. Keeping them in the business is really important. And the last one I want to touch on is talent management. If you go to LinkedIn or Seek or any of these big employment, digital employment sites or job seeking sites, talent management is the fastest growing role there, hands down, especially since COVID. Because what it's about is how do we take the talent we've got and provide some sort of way of managing this and upskilling them and giving them the things that they need to not only train them, but groom them to be our next managers and our next tier of CEOs and dealer principals and things like that. It's a really critical success factor, and it's going to really hit us in the next 10 years because we're in this period of exponential change, so effective talent management and what we offer people both. And it's not just saying, hey, we work for this brand, we've got this academy, here's all of your stuff. What else are you going to offer them? Or what else are you going to do outside of that to bring these people on and engage them and upskill them and increase their value to your business? And a lot of it should be done around, well, okay, what are my business outcomes? And how can I upskill these guys and give them things that they're going to feel good about and engage with, and they're going to stay? Because the great reshuffle isn't over yet, and it's going to continue until we start to get better at this stuff. Because if it doesn't work here, they're going to move to somewhere else that does this stuff better at the end of the day. Look, it's not all doom and gloom. It's not, but I think that it's really important for us to start planning for this. As I said, all of these other things are going to trickle down to us whether we like it or not. What we can do now, though, is start to think about this, because planning around this people side is really important. I can't stress that enough. So really the key takeout should be understand and embrace that there's going to be a whole bunch of changing roles going forward, okay? And it's on the frontline retail side, definitely on the technical side, and a whole range of other things are going to be coming at us. Because, we may decide we want to reinvent our business with some of this. We may be forced to change the way we do it. If, we're going to only be selling EVs, what's our after-sales department look like? So there's a whole range of things we need to think about with the changing roles. We've got to start to get really proactive in the way we look for people and attract people to our business. We've got to be very smart about the way we start to select people. We've got to engage them, and we need to have a talent management plan, particularly for those we're grooming for senior roles. But it should be for everyone. So instead of having, like if you're work in my team, we don't have performance reviews. We have development reviews. Because for me, it's about how do I invest in my team? What development needs are they coming to me and saying, I'd really like to study this or learn more about this? And I'm saying, from my perspective, to drive what I want to do, I want you to do this. Let's do both, and we can plan around this and go forward. So that's a really critical part of it. Okay. And that's it from me. So thank you very much.
And thank you to you too, David. Let's just check out to see if there are any questions for you, either from the physical audience or those joining us online. Okay, perhaps let's start with a question from the room. Is anyone here who has any follow-ups for David? All right, good morning.
Morning. I think that I've been in this industry 50 years, and we're talking about retraining, what we're going to do. We adapt to the situation we're in. And I think the way you're doing these electric vehicles is like it's something trying to put a man on the moon. Yeah. It's a car that works with an electric motor that has some sort of braking system. Our technicians today worked on cars with internal combustion engines. We've got electric cars already, and they're fixing them. I don't see a problem with this talent pool you keep talking about. I think unemployment is a major problem. I think that people will come through the system and it'll happen. I mean, it has done for generations. People used to ride horses, then someone made the Model T Ford. They learned how to fix a Model T Ford. I started in this industry for Volkswagen, and it was a very basic car with points and condenser. Electronic ignition came, and everyone said, ooh, this technology won't last. Well, it did last. Cars had one ignition coil. If the ignition coil packed up, the car stopped. Today, they have 4 ignition coils, and all 3 have to pack up. This technology is normal for it to change. I think you've got very little faith in the human spirit if you think we can't re-engage with people we have today to fix these so-called sophisticated cars. I think you're showing no faith in the human race with that presentation, personally.
All right.
Thanks.
Quite a passionate response to the presentation. That's good. Passion is good.
Passion's great.
Yeah.
I hear what you're saying, and I do agree with you to a large extent, and I'm not saying it can't be done. Far from it, in fact. No, I'm not putting the fear of God into people at all. I'm saying we just need to start to plan for things. And I think that's really important going forward. It's something that needs to be on our radar as for people and a business. Look, we know that they can't release these things without having ways to fix them and deal with them. And that's true. And yes, you're dead right. You can take people and you can upskill what you've got and everything else. But it's the speed of change that is going to be the thing that hurts us the most, I think. And I think it's not about putting the fear of God into people. It's making people aware of what's happening. And there's a big change or big thing between, as you said, the updating of components on a internal combustion engine as opposed to moving to these multifaceted electric platforms and things like that. So again, not trying to put the fear of God into people. It's just about, as I said at the start, forewarned is forearmed. You know this stuff's happening. You see it, you read it, Everyone here reads the media and understands this sort of stuff. But I just need to think we need to plan a little bit and be aware that it's coming. And it's more about planning than anything else.
All right. Okay, perfect. In fact, let's push on then with EVs, a question coming from the online audience about the car rental industry and whether you think that whether the car rental industry in and of itself will push adoption of EVs and hybrids.
In some mature markets.
Mature markets, okay.
There's, when you go to rent your car, you've got the option of taking a hybrid or an EV already, and it makes up about 30% of their fleet. The hybrid models make up about 50%. Okay. So it depends on the market how that operates and what the company decides to do, because they've also got to cater for the infrastructure. So if you're hiring a car in downtown Frankfurt, it's fine to have an EV. But if you're somewhere like here or Australia, where they could drive big distances and everything else, a hybrid makes more sense. Okay.
And circling back to your pest presentation, I think. That was anything but annoying in my view. I found it very insightful. But it's about the T in that transformation. And what is your view on diversity and inclusion with the specific focus on women?
A specific focus on women?
Yes, it's our month internationally.
Goodness me. For me, they're people. I mean, I'm not singling anyone out. I mean, there should be there's no line between the two as far as I'm concerned. And diversity is really important. It's a part of what we have to do going forward, or the way we're learning to do that now. We do it in some markets we do exceptionally well. So I think that my view on diversity is it should happen. It's not about a specific focus area, it's about getting the right people more than anything else, irrespective of gender.
All right. Okay, and but I think it should happen. It needs to happen. But to some of the sentiments that have been reflected earlier on, it is a bit challenging. And I if I just even look at the makeup of this room, it needs to be accelerated. But David, thanks so much for your time. So just one more thing. When you said about how far you have to drive an electric vehicle to make up for the emissions that it took to
Create
put
it,
it together, how about, it was
450,000 kilometers, yeah.
kilometers, right? So I Google, who knows how long you have to drive to go to the moon? So I Googled, kilometers. Well, you can't drive to the moon. I'm just trying to put it in perspective of kilometers. But 384,200.
Oh, there you go.
So
You've
don't
gone to
even
the
get
moon
to
and
the
part way
moon.
back.
Yeah. But David, thanks so much for that presentation.
Cheers, thank you.
So we've got another poll coming up right now that you guys have already started on around the supply chain and the supply of your new car stock at the moment and whether your OEM is able to supply it. Sporadic, okay. Pushing back. All right, so I think the consensus here is that it has improved, perhaps from the worst parts that we're coming from, but it's still a bit of a challenge. It's still sporadic. And perhaps, Fatima, would you like to weigh in here?
Yeah, I think the stock has been the biggest concern in 2022 with the component shortages still coming out of the COVID backlash. But I think it's safe to say that the stock has started coming through, not just any specific model, but a good model mix all around. And that's what we've been wanting. Now we just need the customers to come through and get the stock out the doors.
Okay, perfect. And maybe that's something that we can reflect on further in our panel discussion happening a little later. So last but not least, the last speaker for this session will be Arthur Goldstuck. We heard a bit about him before, but just more color again. He is a celebrated author and a renowned journalist and CEO of Worldwide Works. He's a leading expert on technology trends that are shaping business strategy, consumer use of technology, and the social landscape of the future, and will be addressing us about all things online right now. Thank you, Arthur.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege to be speaking to you today. I have a very close affinity to the automotive industry. Just a year ago, my online magazine, Gadget, had a spin-off called Gadget Wheels. And the reason for that was because more and more of our content we discovered was around automotive technology. Whereas in the past it was a niche, it had now come to the forefront of our coverage. And hardly a day goes by that we don't have an automotive story that we want to run. We just have to hold it back to prevent it from coming across as being only about automotive. But it's possible because there is so much change. So the question I'm asking you today to start with is, would you let a drone walk your dog? And most of you probably wouldn't. I know the gray hair isn't age, it's because of the stress of dealing with the challenges facing the industry in the last few years. But I also know that many of you will balk at that idea. But I'll show you through this presentation why it's not a crazy proposition. Let's go back 100 years or so to this image that symbolized the Roaring Twenties, as it was called. And that photo is highly significant and symbolic for what we're talking about today, because it didn't just represent the mass manufacture of cars and cars becoming widely available, but it also reflected the emancipation of women and the democratization of cars, because the idea of women driving cars in 1910 was just crazy. It was a pure male pursuit. I know some people still feel that today, When my wife tried to buy a new car a couple of years ago, a couple of dealerships told her she should come back with her husband. Now, we spoke about diversity a moment ago, Fifi, and it is Women's Month. So I should just point out that if a woman goes in to buy a car, very often she's done her homework so extensively that she probably knows more than her husband does, and probably more than the dealer does. So what that really symbolizes is that the customer experience has to be diverse as well. But we also have to catch up to where these women were more than 100 years ago. Let's just talk about the Roaring Twenties a moment and what catalyzed it. Firstly, the end of the First World War and the end of the Spanish flu pandemic resulted in a tremendous feeling of liberation. Now, we had a similar kind of feeling. I don't know how many of you were at last year's NADA conference at the Wanderers. It was a large room, sparsely populated, but the people who were there had a sense of exhilaration of being in a physical event again. And that's, generally speaking, how people feel about going out into the world following the pandemic. The problem is that unlike 1920, we were then beset with new major global crises. The Russian invasion of Ukraine, or rather what our government would like to say is a dispute between the Ukraine and Russia, on the one hand, and on the other hand, continued supply chain challenges and political instability across the world. So we don't have that same exuberance that we had 100 years ago. But there are other similarities, like the incredible cultural growth that was seen in the United States and then influenced the jazz age globally, gave birth to rock and roll, eventually to the flower power era. All of that began in the 1920s. We had massive growth in GDP. We're not seeing that now, but we are seeing massive growth in innovation at the moment. So where innovation flourished in the 1920s from automotive, the first electric car was produced in the 1920s. As hard as that is to imagine today, through to the TV set becoming a reality, today the change and the innovation is primarily around software and what software can do for us. And I'll come back to that in a second. This is how the economists saw it at the beginning of 2021. They believed that the Roaring Twenties were back, but that's before the new realities dawned on us. Nevertheless, from an innovation point of view, we've seen an explosion, a revolution in areas like artificial intelligence, cloud computing, 5G, virtual reality, blockchain, and cryptocurrency that goes with it. And in all of these areas, you see a lot of fluctuation, a roller coaster ride, for example, in cryptocurrency, where it shot through the roof 2 years ago, then collapsed last year, and then is on the rise again. But we have to see that in a longer-term context. And cryptocurrency is a great example of long-term view, because if you looked at the price of Bitcoin 10 years ago, 2013, you could buy a pizza for 1 Bitcoin. But you would still be kicking yourself if you did that, because 1 Bitcoin today is worth $22,000 in this week anyway. Last week, it was worth $20,000, and 2 weeks earlier, it was worth $16,000. But a year ago, it was worth $60,000. So the fluctuation is massive. The long-term trend, though, is continually upward. The truly transformative technology, however, is artificial intelligence. And I've already been asked this morning whether I'll be talking about ChatGPT. I won't specifically focus on it. Those who don't know what ChatGPT is, it's going to write your business letters for you, it's going to write your love letters, It's going to write your books. Did you know you could write a book? Well, even if you couldn't, ChatGPT will do it for you. But what I want to say about ChatGPT is it's only the beginning. Just yesterday, Google announced that they were bringing AI into Gmail, into Google Docs, into all their online tools. If any of you use Google Workspace, a revolution is coming. They've announced it. It hasn't been rolled out yet, but people are already testing it. And within Google Docs, you'll be able to do anything ChatGPT does. In Gmail, you'll be able to get it to write your emails for you, to write your letters for you. That's this year already. Bing, Microsoft's search engine. Anyone remember Bing? It was a thing before Google came along, or at least they tried to compete with Google. Google has about 90% market share of the search market. Bing has about 10%, or that was the case a few weeks ago. Then Google tried to make a big deal of how powerful its own version of ChatGPT was, and that was Google Bard. And they demonstrated it in an ad on Twitter, where they asked it a question, and it was a question that most people knew about. It was about the James Webb Telescope. Most people who follow those things knew what the answer was. And Bard got it completely wrong. It was such a shock to the public that the market capitalization of Google dropped by $120 billion. One little marketing error, but it wasn't just a marketing error. It was an error in expectation of what the technology could do. It was still too soon. They were still testing it and training it, and it wasn't ready for the big time. At the same time, Microsoft announced that they were bringing ChatGPT into Bing, and you could go into Bing Chat, and you could pose a question, and unlike ChatGPT, it didn't just access existing content that had been pulled into the system, it could also access the internet. So it was like a clever ChatGPT. And this is transformative. So you can expect when the next numbers come out that Bing will have clawed back a bit of market share. The point about all of that is that not a week goes by that we don't see a massive shift in that environment. This morning, early, OpenAI, the owners of ChatGPT, announced the next generation of GPT. So the existing version is GPT-3. This morning, they unveiled GPT-4. So where you could previously ask it to write a letter or a book for you, now you can ask it to produce a video for you. And that video will be, excuse me, that video will be an original video. It'll be your own video. Video, text, image combined. It's not just going to write a book for you, it's going to produce a Netflix series for you. That's how transformative the technology is. And again, I stress, it's early days. ChatGPT was launched at the end of November last year. It's less than 4 months old, and it's already transformative. Imagine 5 years from now. But wait. It's not actually about the technology. It's what you're going to do with it. So a drone, for example, is an incredibly useful device. It can be used to help with fighting forest fires by scoping what's happening and directing resources to the right place. It can use video and artificial intelligence to assess the state of crops or of groundwater or of soil and allow the analysis of an agricultural area, a forest, or a disaster zone, for example, to ensure optimal responses or how people deal with it. However, most of us see a drone as a toy because we're not exposed to the use case, and when we do see drones in action, they're being used to show off or to film you running on a trail, for example. I'm not sure how many of you do that, but I know a few people who use drones to follow them when they're doing cross-country running. They have to stop quite often to charge the drone, unfortunately. But I'd like to share one use case with you, and that's of a gentleman by the name of Vakis Demetrios, who lives in Cyprus. Anyone heard of him? Well, now you have, because he's the guy who created this image that almost defined the use of technology during the pandemic. When we were in hard lockdown and you weren't allowed to go out your front door, and Demetrios wanted to take his dog for a walk, he used his drone to take the dog for a walk. His drone was a toy, but it became an incredibly useful toy, and it symbolizes the extent to which people's ingenuity takes technology to new levels or gives it new uses and new relevance that it might not have had before. So even where it's released as a toy, like ChatGPT, which was seen as a toy initially, it will become a transformative technology. Let's take the drone out of the picture and look at the cloud. Cloud computing is as transformative for business and for the efficiency of business as will be artificial intelligence chatbots like Bing AI, Google Bard, and ChatGPT. It's just that it's happened incrementally. These new AI technologies have exploded into our consciousness almost overnight, and it feels like it's just happened, although it's been years coming. Cloud, on the other hand, evolved extremely slowly, and it really began with the creation of the Amazon Web Services cloud, which was built originally, guess where? Anyone? In Cape Town. The very first iteration of the Amazon cloud was built in Cape Town because the guy who proposed it to Amazon, to Jeff Bezos, was a Cape Townian by the name of Chris Pinkham, who went to work for Amazon. And when he proposed the architecture and Bezos agreed that they should build this, he then said that Cape Town is a great place to do it because there's a fantastic pool of talent, of tech talent, just waiting to get their hands on something like this. And it's a great lesson because the cloud is now a global phenomenon. It's transformed Amazon, Microsoft, and Google in terms of their revenues they're able to generate from businesses. And it was because someone recognized the talent that was available in this country. Talking about that talent demand and that belief in our talent, that is a fantastic example of belief in our talent. So that's the backstory to the cloud that most people don't know. And that was around 2005, 2006 that it began. 2012 was the year that the first ever advertisement for cloud computing appeared on national TV anywhere in the world. And that's when Microsoft advertised its cloud services on American TV. Until then, businesses weren't aware of it. 10 years later, they can't operate without the cloud. And I'm going to give you a case study of one of the great examples of leveraging the cloud. This is a gentleman by the name of Reed Hastings, who was a very disgruntled customer of a video rental outlet who charged him $40 in late return fees. And he said there must be a better way of doing things. You already know which was the company that he founded because you can see the logo there. I just want to make the point that this wasn't his business. This was the business that charged him a late return fee and inspired him to start Netflix. And the images you see here are a result of Blockbuster not being willing to work with Netflix, because within about 4 years of Netflix being founded, they were about $50 million in debt. And they went to Blockbuster and said to them, look, if you buy us for $50 million, we'll run your online business for you. And at that stage, an online video business was about people ordering the video online and it being physically posted to them. That was before cloud computing. Blockbuster literally laughed them out of their offices. And Reed Hastings says that he was very sad on the flight back to Silicon Valley, and he said to his co-founder, "I'm really sad." And he said, "Why?" He said, "Because now we're going to have to kick Blockbuster's ass." And this is what kick ass looked like. This is what happened in the next decade. By 2010, Blockbuster was bankrupt, and Netflix was a $2.2 billion business. Anyone hazard a guess what Netflix is worth today as we speak? Its market capitalization this morning. Any guesses? $290 billion. That's a serious success story. So what's their secret? Well, firstly, the cloud was not the initial reason for their success, but it was the reason or the tool that enabled them to come to South Africa on the 6th of January 2016. How many of you signed up in January 2016 to Netflix? Anyone? All late adopters here. Or maybe you were sitting in a cinema at the time. But South Africa became one of the fastest growth areas for Netflix in the world. Not biggest. We're not an important market for them, but we are important enough that they've invested more than $1 billion in making Netflix originals in South Africa. But that date in 2016, they were able to launch in 130 countries globally, every single one of them with different rules, age restrictions, licensing conditions, etc., because they used the cloud. It meant they just had to tweak a few settings for each country and they could roll out globally. This is what their model actually looked like. I won't go into detail, but it shows you it wasn't just about putting a few videos onto a computer and making it available via the internet. They had a massive content ecosystem. They had a massive technology ecosystem built on the Amazon cloud. So they can thank the Cape Townian developers for that as well. They had a massive distribution system in terms of technology being used to ensure smooth distribution of videos globally. And then they had to ensure that it could play back on any device. The original failure of DSTV in South Africa attempting to go online and attempting to become an app is that it had to be specifically adapted for every single device on which it was viewed. And many devices couldn't actually accept DSTV Now, as it was called at the time. MultiChoice then came up with the idea of Showmax to break away from the legacy constraints of DSTV, and that has become a viable competitor to Netflix in South Africa. So, I'm not showing off by showing a picture of myself with Reed Hastings, but I am showing off by telling you what he shared with me, because it's not often you get such deep wisdom and insights directly from the horse's mouth of someone who transformed an industry and transformed our thinking about what you can do with technology. And I asked him, what's his secret? And he said, it's not a secret, it's our culture. And that's a key learning for any industry. You've got to have a culture of embracing innovation if you are going to take advantage of innovation. It's not something that you can bolt on to your business. And these were his 4 secrets. If our customers are happy, we grow. So a happy customer is a good customer. If you tell a woman to bring her husband back, you don't have a happy customer. You're not going to grow. You do your best job when you have great competitors. So celebrate each other's success. If other manufacturers are doing well, it means the industry is doing well. And if you're not doing well, it's because you're doing something wrong, but you can learn from your industry. Not everything is perfect. We can always improve. And in their case, their user interface. Even now, they continually tweak their user interface. They, in fact, test their improvements in minutes because so many people are using their system. They can roll out an improvement. They can watch it being implemented. They can pick up the feedback from social media instantly. in terms of people complaining about it. They can get that sentiment analysis from social media, and an hour later, they can decide to pull the improvement or the increment or the new feature, or they can decide to tweak it or to change it or to introduce another improvement. Within an hour, the only constraint is the time it takes to make the decision. So it's obviously not the South African government running that organization. And then, most importantly in this context, for everyone in this audience, is that improving technology makes things faster, better, and more wonderful. It doesn't if you don't want it to. It becomes a threat or a challenge if you allow it to. But you should leverage the technology rather than fear the technology. And the bottom line for Netflix, and for all of you really, is that customer experience is everything. So I'll put this to you: will you be Blockbuster or Netflix? And we already have had Blockbusters in the industry and a few Netflixes. David spoke about this particular contraption earlier, but this is an industry that died because it didn't see the future. And I'm not talking about the horse and the buggy. I'm talking about the horse whip. The horse whip industry was a thriving, profitable industry, and they never imagined they'd go out of business. But they were part of the collateral damage. And that is a symbol of what is going to happen in the coming years. As technology transforms, as we move to EVs, which is inevitable, and as eventually we move to autonomous vehicles, which is not so inevitable, there will be a tremendous amount of collateral damage, and we have to be conscious of which side industries are going to be lost, damaged, or changed in the process. But the demise of the horse whip industry and the horse and buggy is being repeated constantly. And the best example is probably the compact disc. And just last week, the Recording Industry Association of America announced their latest results. And for the first time in years, there was massive optimism in the industry because it recorded record revenues overall. But there was a fascinating underlying number, and that was that vinyl had continued growing for 17 years after it was supposedly replaced by the compact disc in 1987. 1987 was the year that the CD overtook vinyl. 2003 is the year that vinyl, for the first time this century, overtook CDs. Vinyl has made a comeback. Why? Because it gives the listener a visceral experience. And especially young people, people under 30, are turning back to vinyl because they love the tactile experience of that big album, exploring the album art, the liner notes, putting it on a turntable, and having that physical experience. It's not about the technology, it's about the experience. So which industry is next? Well, if you have a bookkeeper and your bookkeeper is complaining that business is bad, you can blame Sage Online, you can blame Xero, you can blame Zoho Books, any of those tools, because most of what bookkeepers were doing in the past has been replaced. What's not replaced is advising the client on what they should be doing, how they should be structuring their books, and the likes. So if your bookkeeper looks like that, your bookkeeper is no longer a bookkeeper. But if your bookkeeper is using online systems and then using that time that's been freed up to guide you, advise you, and analyze what you are doing and what you can do better, then that bookkeeper is still in business. In the next 5 years, we can expect to see the final demise of traditional branch banking. Already, very few of us go into a bank branch. Show of hands, how many of you have been inside a bank in the last 12 months? 1, 2, 3. 3. Less than a handful of people, literally, have been in a bank in the last 12 months. I'm not going to ask you what you were doing there. or if you were armed, or if you're out on bail or what. But the main reason that people still went into a bank until about 2019 was to collect their checkbooks. And of course, that's also a relic of the past. This, by the way, was the first Barclays branch in South Africa. And that is now, I think, it's a museum or a church. In the next 10 years, we can expect not the disappearance of service stations, but the transformation of service stations. They may well look like this again, because those are very cool machines. They look like they could be electric charging stations. But the service station of 2033 will be a charging station. And as opposed to today, where you have a filling station with petrol pumps and a charging station off to the side, you'll have a charging station with multiple outlets and a petrol pump off to the side, because it'll be a peripheral use. And even in South Africa, and the reason in South Africa is because while our government did this, governments around the world are requiring auto manufacturers to move to EVs by various dates, depending on the country. And our automotive industry, which contributes around 6% to GDP, is going to have to convert to manufacturing electric vehicles. And once we're manufacturing them here for export, they'll become more accessible to the local market as well. And then 20 years from now, these relics of the past, not the cars, but vast parking lots, may also be a dim memory. Not in terms of the existence and the cars parked there, that may still exist, but in terms of us driving around a parking lot looking for a spot, because our vehicles will drop us off somewhere and the vehicles will go off and look for a parking spot. You won't have to look for it, because their systems will tell them exactly where the optimum parking spot is going to be. However, this is one of the forecasts I'm making that I'm not going to allow you to hold me to it, because autonomous vehicles are one of the great areas of disillusionment in terms of their evolution. So technologically, they'll be ready in 2043. Culturally and regulatory-wise, they may be far from the mainstream. But the bottom line is that your business is also changing as a result of all of these trends. And I'll very quickly show you from last year's World Economic Forum analysis of what was coming in the next year. Firstly, they said that inflation would rise steeply in the coming year, which is exactly what happened across the world. And sub-Saharan Africa would not experience as high inflation as the United States, for example. So when you look at the very high bar, the US, 38% of respondents expected high levels of inflation. In sub-Saharan Africa, only 11%. So that's also why we haven't seen the superinflation that hit America, for example, in the last while, but it may still come to this country. And then the other big forecast they made was fragmentation of supply chains. But what's really interesting here is that fragmentation would happen not just in goods, but also in labor and technology. And in labor in particular, there's massive fragmentation of the labor force. And what they recommended out of that report was the following organizational priorities that businesses should embrace. And there's that word experience again, seamless experience across all channels. And what they're really saying is reduce the friction for your customers and you'll have happier customers. And same with the third one, enhanced digital customer engagement, again, in the service of seamless experience. And knowledge sharing and diversification of not just supply chains, but also of your business. And I'm not saying you should add fast food to your car sales or to your showroom, but rather to understand that selling cars is going to be about more than just selling the vehicle itself. Let's look at that in the context of the fastest growing industries in the world and the fastest falling industries in the world, according to IBIS World. I've been following them for a few years, and they're pretty spot on in terms of their forecasts. But what's fascinating is the fastest growing industries this year are primarily travel related. In fact, the first 5 are travel, and then number 7 is also travel. What's interesting from what Sifiso and David were saying earlier is that HR and recruitment services are also among the top 10. So the hunt for talent is going to spark massive growth in that particular industry. Number 10 is interesting, casinos and gambling, because people need an outlet for their frustrations and for their tensions. But now let's look at the fastest falling industries in the world. And some of them are obvious, some of them are related purely to manufacture. Global iron ore mining is the biggest one, and then newspaper and magazine publishing, right up there. And we've seen it in this country. The Sunday Times that I write for example, when I worked for them full-time a few decades ago, we were selling 600,000 copies a week, every Sunday. Today, they sell around 120,000. And that's impressive compared to what everyone else is selling, because almost no one else sells more than 100,000 copies per issue. But the scary thing about that number is it's the biggest selling newspaper in Africa. And that gives you a sense of how far newspaper publishing has fallen. Magazine publishing, you only have to go into a CNA, if you can find one, to see how small their magazine sections now are. And the very fact that you can't find one so easily is because they've been replaced by PNA. And PNA doesn't have a magazine section at all. If you go into a Pick and Pay, you'll find a magazine section, but also tiny compared to what it used to be. But there's 2 I'd like to highlight here. First, number 9, global cheese manufacturing. Why would cheese manufacturing fall? Well, there's a global move against dairy, because dairy is seen as unhealthy. And cheese has been one of the great victims of the anti-dairy conspiracy. Most important here, though, is number 7, global automobile engine and parts manufacturing. And that's because they anticipate a fall in the manufacture of vehicles. Not only that, though, but because the manufacture of EVs, of electric vehicles, requires fewer components. And yes, I concur with David about the cost of producing an EV in terms of emissions. But over time, as supply chains become streamlined, demand increases, it'll be similar to the law of supply and demand, where streamlined processes will result in far fewer emissions for EVs. So right now, yeah, environmentally very expensive to produce an EV. Over time, that will shift. Again, as with artificial intelligence, we're in the early stages of the EV revolution. It will keep improving, keep getting better. And then another important context is where the jobs are going to be growing next. And number 1, nursing, should be of interest to everyone here, because the reason that the US Bureau of Labor believes that nursing care is going to grow this decade is because of the aging population across the United States. And in fact, it's an issue worldwide. Japan has the fastest aging population proportionately in the world, and they cannot keep up with the demand for nursing practitioners, doctors, nurses, midwives. Well, okay, not midwives for the elderly, but for their grandchildren, etc. And the result of that is that it's got the biggest robot production industry or sector in the world to produce robots that can assist in the care of the elderly. Note, not replace nurses or doctors, but assist them, make their jobs easier. And that's the key to coming technologies. It will make our lives easier, but it won't replace us. Number 2, wind turbine technicians. That's very big in the United States, but if you travel through the Western and Eastern Cape, you'll also have discovered that there's a huge wind turbine industry in this country. Eskom hasn't noticed yet. Number 3, ushers and ticket takers. And along with that is support staff working in cinemas, theatres, and events environments. And again, this points to the massive need of the public for experience, to have a good experience. And that's why cinemas, if they run properly, will survive. There is a list of 20 of the big growth sectors for jobs. And all of them range from 26% to 46%, which shows that there isn't a huge difference. So from number 3 to number 14, for example, is not a big gap. So let's look at number 14. Taxi drivers. 28% increase in demand for taxi drivers. Why? Because fewer people will be driving cars. The likes of Uber, Bolt, Lyft, etc., and probably newcomers who will arrive. Maybe Netflix taxis, because they could probably do a better job of looking after their customers, might also emerge. But that's also a signal to car dealers that in the future they're going to be servicing the taxi industry or the ride-hailing industry as a key component of their business. And then for me, the most interesting of all, number 19, and just marginally behind the rest, is solar voltaic installers. In other words, solar power or solar panel installers. So you think, yeah, but that's America. No. This is a team from Go Solar, a company which is revolutionizing solar installation in South Africa by providing it on a rental basis. No installation cost. You pay a monthly rental that is less than the cost of your municipal electricity. And eventually, the savings on municipal electricity will more than cover the monthly cost of your solar rental. This team has just finished installing that panel or that set of solar panels on a large house in my suburb. Highly successfully, highly satisfied customers. And this story is being repeated over and over again. And this is one of numerous teams Go Solar has deployed, and they cannot keep up with the demand. There's a 6 to 8 week waiting period now to get solar installed through them. This is a massive growth area. It's a job growth opportunity for the country if the government would only recognize it. But they are so resistant to the idea of change that the incentives they've provided for the industry are still minimal and designed to still protect Eskom. But this is also important for the future of your industry because people talk about EVs being held back by load shedding. The extent to which solar is being rolled out across affluent suburbs in South Africa is dramatic. And every single potential customer of an EV who can afford the monthly repayments on that vehicle can also afford solar power. Load shedding as an issue goes away for your EV customer because they are geared towards the idea of alternative energy. Your world is changing dramatically. And now I'm going to come directly into your world. How's my time? Do I still have a little bit of time? I'll show you very quickly examples right inside your world. This is the new Ford Everest, and that is the infotainment system, which is now vertical and looks like a mobile phone, because the experience of the new customer is one that matches what's in their hand with what's in their car. This is the Volvo XC40 Recharge. Also a vertical screen to match the smartphone, but what's interesting there is that that screen runs on not Android Auto, but on Google itself. It's a Google screen. The most significant thing there is the range of that EV. That was after driving it for a few hours. It's still at 230 kilometers range. These are all cars that I was inside, by the way. This is the Audi e-tron EV, 55 EV. What's significant there is it doesn't have a mirror. It has a camera that then transmits the image onto a screen on both the passenger side and the driver's side. I've got a problem with it because if that mirror gets knocked off or the camera gets knocked off, that's an expensive replacement. But what it emphasizes is the experience of your new generation of motorists who wants everything digital. That is the Nissan X-Trail, photographed in the hills of Slovenia. Now, it's not showing off to tell you that I took that photo during the test drive of the X-Trail in those hills. What is showing off is this, showing you the range of the vehicle, which uses something called e-power. There's a small petrol engine that powers the battery that then runs the vehicle itself. And because it has petrol that's constantly powering the battery and it uses regenerative braking, at this stage, after a day's travel, I had more than 1,100 kilometers of range left in that car. Range anxiety vanishes completely. The idea of where am I going to charge vanishes completely. The BMW i7 with the most beautiful infotainment screens, but right in front of the driver, an augmented reality screen as well, overlaying information over the scene that I'm seeing in front of me. So, of course, you want to concentrate on the traffic, but very often alerts come up that tell you exactly where the issue is when you can't quite see it on the road in front of you. That's the electric i7, by the way. And again, it's not showing off to tell you that I drove that car. What is showing off is to tell you that the back seat, if you look carefully at it, where your feet are, that pad turns up while the front passenger seat lies flat and it turns into a business class seat, and you have a fold down big screen TV on which you can watch Netflix in the car. That is experience. It's a hell of an expensive experience, but it's experience. And then that is the Jaguar Land Rover racing car during the EV Electric Vehicle Grand Prix, or the E-Prix in Cape Town 2 weeks ago. It's not showing off to tell you that I was there. It is showing off to tell you that I actually got into the car. But the significance of that picture and showing off to you is that I discovered just how many controls there were in the car and the extent to which you needed to have the sensibilities of both a racing driver and a video game player to be able to drive that car. And that's the new generation of racing driver, which in turn inspires the new generation of car buyer. This fits into what Gartner calls the hype cycle of innovation, which starts with huge exuberance, mass media hype, and then it dips into the trough of disillusionment and gradually rises up into what they call the plateau of productivity. So where are electric vehicles on this? If you look down at the bottom of the trough of disillusionment, among other things, you'll see autonomous vehicles there. Right now, great disappointment. But you go a bit further up and you find electric vehicles emerging onto what they call the slope of enlightenment. And that means it's on its way to the plateau of productivity. And on the plateau of productivity, you find connected car platforms, which means it's now pervasive, it's now mainstream. And this tells you in turn, electric vehicles will also be there before long. In the next 5 years, electric vehicles will be on that plateau of productivity. And if you're not selling electric vehicles as a major part of your business, you're going to remain behind in that trough of disillusionment. But you all say, this is Africa. We're not going to have that innovation in Africa. But every week, a new data center goes live, and those data centers support cloud explosions of innovation in this country, and they support massive growth in connectivity. Look at the connectivity map of Africa, and look at South Africa, it's almost a solid map of yellow lines showing the fiber grid that crisscrosses the country. South Africa, Kenya, and Nigeria, if you look at this map, are hyper-connected. Connectivity is no longer a luxury, it's a given. The result of that is this research we've just released in the last few weeks showing who shops online in South Africa by age. Firstly, 38% of the adult population. In 2020, at the height of the pandemic, it was 27% of the population. Because connectivity is a given, and because the user experience constantly improves, we're seeing a massive rise in online shopping. And the only age segment in which it drops off is the over 65s. But it's still 16%. And it means that a sizable proportion of that older population who are going to be relying on nursing practitioners also have disposable income and also will be your continual customers for the years to come. The sweet spot, though, is the 25 to 34s. They are digital, they have disposable income, they're rising in their jobs, and they are ready to shop online. So you better service them online as well. It doesn't mean you've got to become an online showroom only, but it means that you've got to be multi-channel, you've got to be digital, and you've got to be seamless. And finally, you've got to give people an experience. Going digital is the means to that experience. It's not the end. Digital for its own sake will doom you. Digital as a means to a greater customer experience is your future. And yes, you will be walking your dog with a drone in the future. Thank you.
Will the drone be affordable, Arthur?
The drones will be very affordable, but those will be the toy drones.
All right, okay. My camera guy, Tepo's here, and he has a drone, and it's not cheap. But a lot has been said, and I think I loved your presentation. It didn't only speak to what technology is doing from a business perspective. I think it has left us with quite a lot of thought for ourselves in terms of reading ourselves at a personal perspective. But let's get to some questions that have come through to you, and I'm going to shoot straight to one that is online right now. No, I think the questions online are still updating. Any questions from the room at this point? No questions for this room. I think that you just blew us away, and you just told us everything that we certainly needed to hear. Arthur, once again, thank you so much for that really informative and insightful presentation.
Vicky.
Oh,
Thanks so much. Thank you.
And I'm going to take a page out of your book when I also want to floss. So I'm not showing off there, but what I am showing you is... So ladies and gentlemen, let's take a quick comfort break. A lot has been said about what's happening globally, about what's happening locally, about where things are going, about where things currently stand. And so let's take a comfort break, stretch our legs, grab a coffee. I think there's still a few snacks up there. Bring them back down, though, because we don't want to keep you any longer than you do need to be here. But what we do want to do is engage you on everything that has been said. Our panel is reading themselves from the top 5 dealers in the country, just speaking to all the things that have been shared and things that you also need to know. So let's call it, let's say maybe at around 1:05. 1 o'clock, actually 1 o'clock sharp. Do your thing, grab your coffee, bring it down, and I will see you soon.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask our panelists to join us on the stage. We have Dirk van Rooyen, dealer principal at Halfway Toyota Honeydew. We have Wayne Simmons, dealer principal at Suzuki Northcliffe. Fatima Motala, dealer principal at Mercedes-Benz Umhlanga. Thembi Nkosi Pansi, dealer principal at Audi Centre Braamfontein. And Roy Aubrey, dealer principal, GWM Haval Edenvale, and a founder of Cherry Edenvale.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you once again for staying. It's wonderful. So I suppose right now it's about practicality. Just everything that has been shared with us so far, just hearing from a dealer's perspective as to what that looks like within their showrooms and how much of it applies and how much of it will need to apply just as a result of the shifting dynamics, not only in the economy as we know it right now, but also in some of the advancements around technology. So perhaps we take it from the person who's closest to me, in terms of reflections, but this is about engagement. So at any point, if you do have any questions, just let me know, raise your hand, and we'll put the question out to the respective speakers. As was announced, we do have Toyota on stage, we've got Suzuki, we've got Mercedes, we've got Audi, as well as the brand that is pretty loved right now. Quite the force right now in the industry, Haval and Chery. So, Roy, just to begin with you then, what do you make of everything that has been said, and what does that look like in terms of what's happening in your business?
Well, I think the important thing is always just to take the time out, because I think in motor businesses you get so embedded in the day-to-day activities, and you sort of hear on the peripherals the noise about change and all that and that kind of stuff. So I think it's so important to take the time out, listen to people that are looking at our industry from outside and concentrating. And so there are two things that concentrates your focus on it, and I think it is interesting. Like the one speaker said, you know, the motor industry has faced numerous crises and changes over the years, and we're a dynamic bunch of people. So as long as you're aware of it and you focus your attention on it, and you're ready for it and adapt to it quickly, because as we've heard today, it's coming. And I'll give you an example of what we've done in our dealerships. Because of load shedding, we've gone in with full solar systems that they're busy implementing. So instead of hiding the batteries in the back office somewhere, we've actually made a wall, and we've wallpapered it and it says GWM goes green or Chery goes green, and we've got the tech on the wall so that when the EVs arrive with us, they're going to sit in the showroom, they're going to be plugged in against the wall of batteries that are charging them, and there's going to be a TV that shows you what's getting charged from the sun through the panels and what's being done through the battery. So I think you've got to look at it all the time, go to functions like this and draw that stuff out of it and get ready. I also believe that, you know, South Africa's not quite ready for the EV environment. My personal opinion, it's a toy for the rich at the moment. So it's that car that you can have, and if you've had load shedding issues or whatever, you'll use your hybrid or whatever. I think hybrid's more suited to our market. But also, once again, it comes with that whole technology thing that we've got to address and get into, and the world's going that way.
Sure.
But I think there is, if I look at the market now, and if you look at overseas, there's a step back from this whole we are 100% EV. You know, VW even got rid of their MD and put the guy who ran Porsche in charge now, because the guys are saying there is still space for ICE. You know, the industry, there are three sectors to it in terms of the EV. The one where it's being legislated, like in Europe. Then you've got a second hub, which is in Australia, where you've got the greenies. They don't have to worry about being murdered in their driveway, so they worry about green things and all that kind of stuff. So they will adopt like electrification and that. And then you've got markets like South Africa, where it's not really ready for it, and our consumers mostly won't adapt to it quite quickly. So the mainstream manufacturers are looking at ways of extending ICE engines for markets like South Africa and the second-tier adopters.
Sure. Okay.
So,
okay.
yeah.
No, great points, great insights. Tim Ngosi, you had one of the vehicles at Audi, the e-tron, showed on screen by Arthur in terms of what is happening in technology in the space. Just your reflections again on what has been shared and how Audi is looking at positioning itself further in the EV space.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I think the speakers, they've said quite a lot, very inspiring stuff, and one have to look into the future without, of course, neglecting where you are and what you need to do in your operation currently to make sure that you go through the year and few years to come before the EVs are full in South Africa. Now, Audi is doing a lot in that space. They've increased the number of charging stations in the country, putting some serious investment, fast chargers in the Mall of Africa and the likes. So definitely the EVs are the future, and Audi is playing or investing quite immensely in that space. But I think for me, the take of the speakers earlier on in terms of how we prepare ourselves for the future is to say, what are we doing currently to make sure that we weather the storm that we're facing as an industry, in order for us to have that enthusiasm and the focus and the direction that we want for the future when things are changing. And something that sticks out was the people, how we invest in the people, how we recruit people, and how we train and develop people. And for me, that's thought leadership. Certain things are not going the way we want in the industry currently, and we have to now come up with ways as to say, how do we move forward? And funny enough, this morning as I was sitting in the train, I happened to sit next to a CA from Investec, and he happened to inquire about an Audi from Braamfontein. So he saw the car I'm driving, but then the conversation went into saying he was looking for a vehicle, the service he got was excellent and all of that. He said he went to another brand because the wife didn't want him to buy the TTRS he wanted to buy. And he said the experience was completely shocking. So I said to him, for me, it's not about the car. We think that we're in the car business. In my view, we are not. It's a people's business. People buy from people. And I'm sure a lot of speakers mentioned the experience earlier on.
Sure.
And I think what will help us to weather the storm currently is to look at us as leaders, as dealer principal in our business. Are we pressing the right buttons? Are we doing the right things? Are we preparing ourselves for the future, correcting the current circumstances that we're in? We've got shareholders to look up to and give back the investment. We've got the OEMs and the likes. What are we doing with our people currently?
Okay.
How are we servicing our people and our customers to give them the experience they want so that they can come back?
Okay. Okay. I mean, in talking about storms, we do have a question that the audience has asked. I don't know if the results can be put on the screen just because we can't see the full table there. But as they do come, okay, so are you experiencing supply issues with parts in your OEM? Yes, we are having delays, is what most people are saying, in parts supplies, but are managing to service our customers overall. No, we have good parts supply. So the majority is saying, yes, we're still experiencing some supply issues, but others saying things are good. And in terms of storm, I think it's only right to come to you, just given what we all saw happening to Toyota in the recent while, although we have also monitored your recovery and we're seeing its business as usual somewhat to a degree. How can you relate to the concerns around the supply still, and how would you describe this environment right now for the business?
Well, Fifi, thank you for having us. I think what Toyota South Africa has managed to achieve was quite remarkable. In the space with regards to the floods that we've had down in KZN. I think there was close to 80,000 cars that they've lost, well, 40,000 production, about 40,000 cars that they smashed, 4,000 cars that they smashed. And I think about how they've really came out of the dungeons there is remarkable. And I think we've had our conference last week Friday, and they've shared a lot of these stories with us. And as I've said, quite remarkable to see that they're back on the horse, the supply coming through quite nicely. There's certain models that we still see drips and drabs of. I think our hybrid model really took the market by storm. And I think Toyota's outlook on EV vehicles is a little bit different to the rest of the other OEMs globally. I think Toyota and Hyundai is very similar. I've read an article on the automotive publication where they've actually been wrapped over the knuckles a little bit, where they said, listen, well, we're much more going to go for plug-in hybrid, not specifically just electric vehicles, but plug-in hybrid. I think there's 4 RAVs currently in South Africa producing about 255 kilowatt, which is a plug-in hybrid, not available to sell, but they're testing. So phenomenal performance that we're getting out of those vehicles. So yeah, I think we will see a lot of change quickly within the next 2-3 years to hybrid. Our Corolla Cross is popular, but we're battling with the supply of hybrid engines currently manufactured in South Africa. But a great uptake by the public and our customer base, and I think there's a lot of customers that do migrate. Coming back to what you've asked with regards to parts supply, Toyota South Africa has doubled the size of their parts storage yard out in Atlas Road last year. So currently, well, and we measure it very carefully. So currently, my business runs on 98.5% filling rate per day within my workshop, which is phenomenal. Very proud of the guys, but I'm also a little bit privileged because I'm in the inner circle, so I get part supply twice a day, 9 o'clock and 2 o'clock every day. So I think the Japanese, obviously there was a lot of influence of Japanese consultants and engineers to come and help get the plant back up and running. And again, I'm very proud to be part of the brand and to support them where we can.
Okay, no, some good color. So the same question to Fatima and Wayne. I mean, if you guys had to vote right now, what would your response be as to whether certain parts are still an issue for your business or not?
Mercedes-Benz have a unique situation currently. We moved over to a new system from an old system which has been in place for like 22 odd years. And with the move, there's been a lot of challenges that have come about. So that's a bit of a unique situation other than the normal industry parts situation we find ourselves in. But by and large, going back to what the results also state, it comes back to the way you manage it. And there's been a lot of support from the OEM themselves, great support to the dealer network in helping us through this challenging times with regards to the parts challenges with the IT system. But again, and it takes me back to what one of the speakers mentioned about finding the right people, because it's in times like this when you have the right individuals, you can get through these sort of challenges without having too much of damage done to the brand, the customers, etc. It's just how you manage it. And like you mentioned, Nkosi, the motor industry is about relationships, and it's all about building relationships, and that also stems from having the right people and training them well and finding the right fit for the positions that we have in place. And it helps you through these challenging times as well.
Sure, and keeping them as well. I think we learned quite a bit about retaining the people. Wayne, just how's Suzuki?
Suzuki is doing actually quite well in it. I think in the last 2 years, we've actually surprised ourselves. If you compare the last 4 years versus the last 2 years, and that it's a phenomenal growth, not just for Suzuki Auto South Africa, but for the dealer network as well in that. We've seen quite a few dealers opening up in the last 18 months. Parts supply, I think any OEM at the moment, there is a fair, good amount of parts supply. Certain models, there will always be certain components, especially on the electronic side, that will be on a back order. We're currently on a 21 days in that. I think it's a fair amount of days to wait for parts. If there's a small delay in that, once again, we had the conversation earlier, clear communication to your customer. If you play open cards from the beginning to your customer, they do accept it. They're not always happy, but it does make it easier in the long run.
Sure. Yeah, the wait, particularly in the pandemic, was quite long. My mother loves the Jimny, by the way. I have to work extra hard to make sure I can get it for her. But just a
bit of a waiting list, but yeah, you
because of the parts.
No, it's just a bit of a waiting list at the moment. Products is freely available, certain models. Jimny is in the back order at the moment. As most of you know, I think it's in the last Q3, the 5-door Jimny is being launched as well. So I think there's a lot of focus on, especially all the new models that's being launched this year and the Jimny 5. Slight delay in imports on three-door chimneys, but I reckon it's going to be sorted out in the next 2-3 months.
Okay. So I've got a bit of time there. Just the opening it up to the floor once again. Any questions, any comments also that you might have for the respective speakers, and also what's going on in their dealerships? And once again, anything coming online? So there's another poll that is being readied, is being put forward, and we'll get to those responses in just a short while. It's about the accountability of FICA. And maybe, yeah, as soon as those results come out, then perhaps we can put it to the speakers. But I just perhaps if we sum up in total what has been shared. From the onset, we heard a lot about the economy and what the picture looks like and the complexities. We heard a little bit about the industry and the shifting dynamics and what's happening regarding pricing. And then obviously everything around the technology, the transition, the opportunities, and perhaps some targets that we may or may not meet. As a net, what does that ultimately mean for your respective dealerships operating in this environment? And Roy, I'll bring it back to you again. Are you excited? I mean, we had a question at the top about whether we are expecting to see this year being a lot better than it was last year, or whether much of the same.
No, I think, look, I'm in a very different space to a lot of people, and I think, there's a massive onslaught from the Chinese companies. It's no secret that the Chinese economy has retracted, and, while being the biggest automotive market in the world, they focused internally for a long time, and then when the recession hit China, the guys have looked outside. And I was at a distributor conference in Bangkok last year, and Great Wall are like ridiculously aggressive about their expansion into external markets. So I mean, I think that's a massive thing that's coming, but with it brings great stuff for us in that there's all this new product that's coming at us. And I think the interesting thing to note about the Chinese onslaught on the market is, 10 years ago or 15 years ago, the time that I was with GWM, it was embarrassing. My kids, I can remember picking my son up from the Hilton College bus, and he was embarrassed to get into my GWM hover. Those same kids that got off the bus that day are now buying H6 GTs and all that kind of stuff, because the product has moved into that realm. And I think with COVID, with the slowdown and all that, I think people have reanalyzed, is it worth spending the 25 or 45,000 rand that I'm paying on the HP on this car standing outside that I don't use? Okay, well, let's realign it, because then we can spend more of the money on travel. And they come in and look at our type or the second tier alternatives, and they're finding actually that the product is spectacular.
Sure.
So I think there's a dynamic change. Also, if you look, Toyota and the top guys have their entrenched section, and I think again in the NAAMSA numbers you saw, Toyota continues just to take that thing, and as long as they build white double cabs and white this, they've got that section closed, and the rest of us are going to fight for the other section of the pie. But then you sort of take that there was that pecking order, and now suddenly the Chinese guys have come in, and I mean, and they've just taken a big chunk out of it. So last month, for instance, the Chery Tiggo 4 got into the top 10, as a derivative, which is an amazing. 18 months ago when we were taking on Chery, I was saying to Warren, I don't know, they had such a crap reputation, it was terrible, the cars used to fall apart. But now these spectacular cars have arrived, and the market's taken to them like a duck like water, So they've just grabbed that section out. The other interesting thing to note about the Chinese market is that the period with which they're bringing new cars to market. I mean, you guys must have a look at this new Armada that Chery's launching. It's the build quality and everything, the car's spectacular, So it's not like if you're going to buy a second-tier brand in the old days, as I said, it used to be sticking a sign on your back saying, yes, I'm cutting off, I can't afford to buy the nice car, Whereas now it's the intelligent choice. Why should I spend the 30 grand a month when I can spend 15 grand a month and I'm getting this car that when you walk into the dealership, it's built spectacularly. And their turnaround time on new product is going to just disrupt the whole market, in Europe and Japan and all, they're still taking 4 to 5 years to develop new product. In the Chinese things, from initial concept design to on the showroom floor, they are looking at 18 to 24 months. I mean, it's mind-boggling, the changes. So there's going to be massive changes, and it's going to come through in South Africa. I think there's going to be another couple of Chinese guys knocking on the door to set up shop here.
Sure.
And they're going to take another chunk of the pie. So that's why I'm bullish about our market. Because I think, you know, the Toyota are actually going to sell their share, the VW are actually going to sell their share, and we've got good product coming in that's going to build the market aggressively.
Okay, provided the Toyota stick to the white bucket.
They only build white buckets. But it's also unfair, you know, they don't play in the space, and then they launch the Corolla Cross, and it's just like, boom, okay, they take that portion out of the market, and you can't fight for it anymore because
it's
they've got white
Roy
ones.
didn't sit next to me. I'll leave the audience to slate me.
No, Roy,
no, but I feel it's only fair to give you a right of response.
It's fortunate, you know, and I think that's how the South African consumer is a very fickle consumer. You must always remember that. I mean, we only buy high-spec cars, you know, and that's what are the discussions we always have. And you know, so they're very set in their ways, you know. I mean, so you've bought a white Toyota, you're always going to buy a white Toyota every day. You know?
So you agree with him? That's your right of reply?
No, well, on certain things, yes.
Yeah.
So we try to change the colors every now and then. But I think, well, I'm also very excited about the product that they bring in. Well, some of the slides that we've seen today, I think it was in your slides, Dave, where it's stipulated that competition is good, you know, and competition is good. Well, and we can see actually our vehicles are getting better and better because we're getting tested on a daily basis, you know. Well, Ford Ranger is out, massive engine, great performance, great infotainment systems, and I'm looking forward to our facelift because well, they're going to need to bring that in, otherwise because you can't find yourself longing. So also you guys passenger vehicles are very good.
Sure.
I love buying them and selling them out second-hand, but we're going to need to play, you know, so you can't just be focused. You will be stupid if you're just going to focus on white Hilux buckets, you know. The market is much bigger than that. So I agree. I think this year is going to be a little bit more challenging with regards to I think exposable income, where a lot of people, well, interest rates hike, and a lot of people take their money and put it into solar and finance that. So there's less to actually go and spend on a motor vehicle. But I think the year is going to be great.
Yeah, and that's the thing, though. A lot of competing interests for the consumer wallet. I mean, talking about the size of your respective organizations, the Suzuki, in terms of the position in the market, it dominates, as well as VW, of which the Audi group is a part of. How are you guys thinking about that, though? Not only competition from other brands, but also competition from other factors that are looking for the consumer wallet. He mentioned inflation, then there's interest rates, then there's the fact that we all have to install solar. Thanks so much to Arthur for, please can you share the numbers of those guys who do it at cost, because it's costing an arm and a leg, and a whole host of, and the fact that we are prioritizing experiences. The fact you did say that the fastest growing experiences right now in hospitality and travel and all of that. So you sum all of that up and it's less money to come buy a new car or even a used car. Just your thoughts on driving through that terrain.
No, thanks. So look, I think for the premium segment, it's not been easy. More so with my friend here, Roy, and the Haval brand. I mean, they're doing exceptionally well. But I think for every segment of our industry, you know, there's always clients. It's a matter of how do we approach those clients and find them, and how do we nurture those clients and give them the experience that our speakers were talking about. But for the last couple of months, it's been very, very rough for the Audi brand, as an example, whereby we have to come up with the certain financial services product to make sure that, you know, we get, you know, that last bit that Fifi have left in a wallet, and to make it worth a while with the guaranteed future values with the new Audi Assured product. So now and again, we have to look at how can we offer better service to the customer and make sure that we keep the customer within the premium brand, or otherwise they will go to my panelist, fellow panelist here. So it's been a rough one, but of course, quality always comes at a premium. And that's what certain consumers in our economy, in our market, they're looking for. They're still looking for that premium brand, but it is shrinking in terms of percentage compared to the other brands, which are doing exceptionally well.
Okay, I must apologize in advance. Unfortunately, Fatima got my last rands and cents in terms of the car that was bought. But
you can trade it in, it's okay.
But I mean, it's premium market. You're still resilient, but those consumers are also feeling some heat. How are you doing things?
Yeah, for sure. And on that note, it's all about customer retention for us now. So you're not going to get the trade in. We're going to retain you. But on the luxury segment side, I mean, I wish I could be as optimistic as Roy, but that's just the reality of the segment that we find ourselves in. It's going to be tough, but it's, again, going back to basics for us, a lot of focus on customer retention because those customers are already part of the brand, part of the family, the experience, etc. And even if it means the retention in the form of the older vehicles. So we've launched what's known as a stop service segment, which caters for vehicles out of maintenance, etc., etc. But it's, again, just keeping them in the brand. And at some point when the situation does ease off a bit and get more favorable, they're already there to just sell them into a new brand, a new vehicle.
All right.
And just maintaining those relationships. But in the luxury segment, it's going to be a tough year.
Okay, so kind of mixed sentiment so far in terms of the outlook for the year. You lie on the more optimistic or the pessimistic side?
Yeah, I just want to, and I'm talking on my dealer Suzuki Northcliffe at the moment. So we've noticed if we've got a product that's value for money, you're saving fuel at the end of the day, it's reliable and that. We're seeing a lot of more inquiries if there's inflation that's increasing, your fuel increasing and interest rates in it. So as soon as, and I know it doesn't sound fair in it, but as soon as a negative increases in South Africa, our inquiries increase in that because we've got a product that is value for money. And we're noticing on the used car side in that the vehicles we're actually trading in is the more upper class vehicles. So we're trading in vehicles from, let's say, 500,000 and we're selling vehicles for 200,000. So there's a lot of consumers at the moment that's turning over that cents and rands to make sure they can still have the quality of life, and they're ensuring that if there's a change in the lifestyle, your interest, your fuel prices and that, there is that safety gap at the moment.
Okay.
So yeah, we're seeing quite a bigger increase in the inquiries in that, I would say, in the last 18 months.
Okay, wow. So you're in a bit of a sweet spot because that has been...
It doesn't sound right in it, but yeah, we're sitting in quite a fair sweet spot at the moment.
Yeah, because the last 18 months is when things have gotten a whole lot tougher.
No, it's a very sweet spot. Just say it.
I believe we do have a question from the floor.
It's not a sales question. Let me get that out of the way. But I can't help, when I look at this stage, I don't know if I'm the only one who's wondering, from a transformation point of view, it's a two-pronged question. Is this an indication of where the industry is? Question. And if so, and anyone can take the question, what are you guys doing, whoever takes the question, to make sure that this picture looks slightly different when we come back here next year? So is this an indication of where the industry is from a transformation point of view? And if so, what are you guys doing to make sure that it's a different picture when you come back here next year? I did say it's not a sales question.
All right. Who's up for that? Because I think that's...
Yeah. I know, I just want to get a clarity, in terms of transformation, in terms of gender, or in terms of, just to be clear as to, because just now we respond to something across the board. Okay, look, I think I'll take it. I strongly believe that transformation and diversity is important in the automotive industry, but at the same time, it won't happen overnight, right? As dealerships, for instance, we make sure that transformation is in place and we get the right people, skill them, develop them, and grow them within the industry. I'll speak for myself, for instance, right? When I joined this industry, I came in as a sales executive, coming from a very disadvantaged background and everything else. coming from cleaning at the restaurant and cleaning toilets and all of that. I got into the industry and I told myself one thing, that I'll make a success out of it, without any qualification, without anything. And fast track now, I'm running car dealerships and everything else. Of course, I have to rope in others to say it's not going to happen overnight. You won't get it on silver platter. You have to work hard for it, be determined, be focused, and also keep within the rules of the game. So there are a lot of dealers that I know and dealer groups that are working on that. You don't want to put in the numbers for the sake of putting the numbers. We need to make sure that we've got the right representative. I'm sure last year at the NADA conference, I'm not sure if there was a woman in there. I'm not sure if there was a black individual like myself in there. So there is a progress that has been made. And I think when we look at the industry, we shouldn't say how many numbers. We should say how many people have got in and try to transform others as we move along. Thanks.
Okay. I think that's fair. And I think just to sum up, if we can just have that question come back up on the screen. All right, and perhaps closing remarks from each of you on this. I believe it affects all of you. So just car dealerships becoming accountable institutions in terms of FICA as high-value goods dealers. Has your dealer made the necessary changes? And the response is yes, documents, programs, and training all done. In fact, most people have responded that way. Yes, mostly documents and processes being updated. No, we need guidance as to what to do, 14%, and no, we will make the changes when we are forced to, 8%. So just parting shots. Are you all FICA compliant, and has it been easy to change? Roy?
Yeah, I think.
Or Wayne, you want to go? Oh,
Yeah,
Dirk,
Fifi,
go
I
ahead.
think it's just it's the rules of the game and the rules of engagement. If you're part of that 8%, you're gonna fall short, very short. There's huge fines coming our way if you don't comply. Yes, we've changed. I'm fully compliant, and well, we just need to have the discipline and have the routine for reporting these things, and it needs to go through that mold. And anybody that want to sidestep it, we make sure that we bring them in line again. So. Yeah, I think it's important to go hand in hand with the POPIA Act that is already in existence, and you're going to need to comply.
All right, because I was told that you still have some time to make sure that all documents and everything are processed. But Fatima, do you?
I think
share
certain
similar?
things are just not negotiable.
Okay. So it's done.
It has to be done. It's implemented, and there's too high a risk not to. So you've just got to get it done.
Okay. Those fines. Wayne, same forces.
Yeah, no, we got a phenomenal HR department. So as soon as anybody new is employed that hasn't done processes, within a week and that training is booked, it has to be completed. So
All
it's a
right.
non-negotiable at our company.
So everyone falling in the 44% on stage. Yourself as well, Timothy?
No, it goes without saying, it's a no-brainer. We have to make sure that we fireproof the business and make sure that we are compliant in all aspects of the business. So yeah, definitely.
All right. Roy, just for comic relief, be the outlier.
No, I think this one is too big to, and I think also, we've had the FNI side of the business and all that. So I think we're quite used to sort of the legislators looking at us. I think they always see us as low-hanging fruit to come at, So now you've got to have it in mind. Yeah.
Okay, no, perfect. I think that with that said, it has been a fascinating morning so far. Oh, I'm being directed to one more question coming from the floor. No more questions coming from the floor. Yeah, I think it has been really fascinating. I've enjoyed spending time with you and learning a whole lot more about your industry. I am excited for you, and I do hope that things go according to plan. And I look forward to, I suppose, engaging on future platforms throughout the year. But with that said, could I ask the audience just to help me congratulate and just thank the panel members for their time. And on the note, just a big thank you from myself, from the team, everyone that's put this together, and the sponsors that enabled us to be in the comforts of Melrose Arch this morning. I do understand that lunch will be served. If not, oops. but hopefully, hopefully they can put a plan together. And
Alan's nodding, yes.
Yes, lunch will be served. If you don't yet have a parking ticket, if you weren't given one when you came through, please make sure that you do get one when you go out. This is Melrose Arch, and times are still tough for us all. Have a great time, and look forward to seeing you again in future. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.